The story opens on a crisp, bustling city street in the dead of winter, where the biting night air is filled with the thick, swirling haze of falling snow. Right in the heart of the bustling crowd, a family is walking by, their faces bright with cheer. A little girl, beaming with excitement, pipes up to tell them that this has been the absolute best day of her entire life. The happy scene hits a sudden snag when they come to an abrupt halt. A towering, mysterious figure has stepped directly into their path, looming over them and blocking their way. The young girl tilts her head all the way back, her eyes widening in pure astonishment as she takes in the man's massive, imposing frame. She can't help but blurt out, "Wow, you're so big." Our lead character watches from nearby, a frustrated sigh escaping him as he internally grumbles about the constant struggle of having to weave through the throngs of people just to get anywhere. As he scans the sea of faces, a bitter realization settles in. Amid all this holiday bustle and these connected families, he is the only one standing there completely and utterly alone. Shaking off the melancholy, the young man turns away, continuing his solitary trek through the cold until he reaches the flickering lights of a nearby subway entrance. He pauses near the stairs, his movements coming to a standstill as his gaze locks onto something peculiar a short distance ahead. Narrowing his eyes against the driving snow, he makes out the silhouette of a solitary figure slumped down on the freezing pavement. A quiet realization washes over him. It turns out he isn't the only lonely soul drifting through the chaos of the city street tonight. It's an old man decked out in a tattered Santa Claus suit, huddled on the ground with a handwritten sign propped up beside him, inviting passersby to share their secret wishes. The sight stabs at his heart, pulling up painful memories of the past. Today is Christmas Eve, the very same date his parents were taken from him years ago. Stirred by the sudden wave of grief and empathy, the young man reaches into his pocket, fumbling to pull out his wallet to offer the stranger a little bit of support. He steps toward the old man, kneeling down to hand over the cash along with a small, wrapped snack he had been carrying with him. With a gentle nod, he places both the food and the money directly onto the man's makeshift wish sign. But then, the unexpected happens. The white-bearded figure's hand darts out with shocking speed, clamping onto the young man's wrist with an iron-like strength as he wheezes out a raspy, sincere thank you. The old man doesn't let go. Instead, he insists on returning the favor, demanding that the young man open up and tell him his deepest, most earnest wish. Confused and more than a little unsettled, the protagonist tries to pull away, assuming the guy has finally snapped, but the costumed man's grip remains like a vice, impossible to shake off. The self-proclaimed Santa looks him in the eye, revealing that he is there specifically to grant the wish of a genuinely kind person, and he keeps the young man completely immobilized until he complies. With an intense, desperate look in his eyes, the old man begs him to voice his wish, explaining that it's the only way he'll be able to return to his home village. Feeling drained and wanting this weird encounter to end, the protagonist asks if he will finally be released if he just gives the old man the answer he wants. As he prepares to speak, a surge of deep, buried longing rises to the surface, and he begins to articulate the one thing he's wanted more than anything else. He starts by saying he just wants to win the lottery, but the old man shakes his head, cutting through the lie and insisting that isn't his true, heartfelt desire. The young man pauses, really digging deep into his own soul to consider what he actually craves from life. More than money, he wants a real family, a place where he is never abandoned and truly belongs. A small, genuine smile touches his lips as he admits it. He wants a loving, sweet wife and a darling little daughter to call his own. The bearded man seems to feel the raw honesty in the air, recognizing the years of profound loneliness that have defined the young man's existence. The old man lets out a soft, satisfied hum, feeling incredibly fortunate to have crossed paths with such a pure, conjured spirit on a night like this. Suddenly, the old man's eyes glow with a piercing red light, and he makes a solemn vow to provide him with a devoted wife and a daughter who will honor and respect him forever. The protagonist is left stunned, his heart hammering against his ribs as he hears the strange Santa, wishing him a life filled with genuine joy and happiness. Finally, the iron grip snaps open, and the young man scrambles away as fast as he can, muttering to himself that the old man was clearly out of his mind. Behind him, the man's voice bellows into the night, shouting that he'll use every ounce of his power to make it happen, as a chorus of other Santas cheers him on from the shadows. He stumbles into the subway train, his heart racing, desperately trying to convince himself that it was all just a crazy, stress-induced hallucination. Even as he sits there trying to breathe, the question burns in his mind. Why on earth did he spill his deepest, most vulnerable secret to a complete stranger? His eyes drift to a poster of a happy family hanging on the subway wall, and he quietly admits to himself that he spoke up simply because he, too, is desperate for that kind of warmth. Leaning his head back, he closes his eyes, casting a silent, longing wish into the universe to finally experience the same happiness that everyone else seems to take for granted. Just as his thoughts begin to drift, a bizarre, metallic scent hits his nose, followed immediately by a wave of unnatural, bone-chilling cold. He wakes up with a rough groan, shivering as he realizes he's completely shirtless and lying in the middle of a location he doesn't recognize at all. His eyes snap open, darting around in a blind panic as he tries to process the completely foreign and terrifying environment surrounding him. Everything is a blurry mess, but as his vision clears, he realizes he's being jostled about. He's inside some sort of moving wooden wagon. He tries to move, only to realize his hands are restricted. He's trapped inside a cage, and his mind races to figure out where in the world he could have ended up. Looking through the wooden slats, he spots several other people chained up nearby, and a chilling thought crosses his mind. It feels like he's been tossed straight into the Middle Ages. The silence of his confusion is broken by the heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps approaching the cage from outside. Two guards walk by, barking orders at each other in a harsh, unfamiliar tongue, and the young man feels a cold sweat break out as he realizes he can't understand a single word. Between the medieval surroundings and the completely alien language, he is left feeling utterly helpless and lost. He takes a shaky breath, coming to the only logical and terrifying conclusion. Dream or not, he has somehow been transported to an entirely different world. Scanning the other prisoners, he notices one man lying motionless and unconscious, but he forces himself to look away. In this brutal place, the living have to focus on surviving. He crawls over to the man, offering a silent apology before beginning to peel the clothes off the unconscious prisoner, so he can finally shield his body from the freezing air. Clad in the rough, borrowed garments of a prisoner, he finally has some protection against the elements, though his situation remains dire. Suddenly, that strange, echo's voice of the Santa Claus from earlier drifts through his mind, a haunting reminder that he promised to use all his power to grant that wish. Clutching his chest, the young man wonders in a daze if this is truly the happiness he was promised, and he prays that he'll wake up from this nightmare soon. Day after day, night after night, he remains confined within the jolting wooden wagon as it travels toward an unknown destination. Throughout this grueling time, he's come to the grim realization that everyone else caged alongside him, himself included, is nothing more than a captive. He has also begun to piece together the soldiers' true intent as they drag them from place to place. It's clear now that the purpose of this relentless journey is to transport them to distant lands to be bartered off as cheap, forced labor. When they finally rattle into a village, a man who appears to be in charge of the operation steps forward, his eyes scanning the prisoners as if he were shopping for livestock to pick the strongest among them. Accepting this harrowing new reality is a crushing blow to his pride, yet deep down, it also sparks a tiny, flickering ember of expectation in his chest. He clings to the thought that this might be his only viable escape from the stifling darkness of the wagon. Since he is still in decent physical shape, he convinces himself that he stands a good chance of being selected. It's the first real spark of hope he has dared to feel since the moment he was thrust into this bizarre and terrifying new world. However, that hope begins to wither away as they pass through one village after another. Yet even after all that travel, not a single soul shows any interest in picking him. The wagon continues its seemingly endless trek through wild, distant forests and looming mountain passes, leaving him trapped in that cramped wooden cage, his sense of hopelessness growing with every passing mile. Collapsed on the filthy floorboards, the young man stares into the void, questioning whether it's even worth the effort to keep going, when all that awaits him is a life of endless suffering and hardship. In the midst of his despair, the memory of his mother's voice drifts back to him, reminding him of her constant encouragement to work hard and live life to the fullest. He recalls her often asking if he had truly taken that vital, life-shaping advice to heart, his conscience stinging at the irony of his current situation. Jo-won then stares blankly into the darkness, wrestling with the heavy doubt of whether he possesses the strength to endure this miserable, soul-crushing existence. The vivid memory of that strange Santa Claus, with his wild promise of future happiness, returns to haunt his thoughts, feeling more like a cruel joke than a comfort. Overcome by a sudden surge of bitter frustration, he reaches out to snatch a stray fork from the debris, channeling all his boiling anger toward both this wretched new world and the life he left behind. Lost in a moment of pure, unadulterated despair, the young man grips the metal object with every ounce of strength he can muster, his knuckles turning white. In his current state of mind, the only definition of happiness he can grasp is the desperate hope of finally escaping this torment and making the pain go away for good. But then, he freezes at the very last second. Buried deep beneath his exhaustion, there is a stubborn refusal to simply give up and die in a godforsaken place like this. His mind flashes back to his most profound, inner wish, The simple, honest desire to find true happiness and to build a family of his own. Taking a shuddering breath, he slowly calms down, standing motionless with the fork still clutched in his hand, feeling entirely adrift and unsure of his next move. Out of nowhere, a remarkably beautiful woman appears on the other side of the cage, her eyes softening as she holds out a piece of bread toward him. With a gentle, sympathetic smile, she carefully slides the food through the iron bars, offering a moment of grace to the starving, weary prisoner. A heartbeat later, a tiny, adorable young girl peeks out, shyly hiding behind the woman's skirts as she watches him. Completely blindsided by their sudden presence, the young man gasps in surprise, his fingers loosening until the fork clatters loudly against the wooden wagon floor. The scene shifts abruptly to a modest, humble little wooden cabin nestled deep within a quiet, grassy clearing. Inside the simple dwelling, the same woman and the little girl are seated together at a small table, quietly sharing a meal. The small blonde girl sits hunched over, happily slurping her soup directly from the rim of the bowl, completely focused on her meal. The woman, showing a tender concern, nudges her own portion of food toward the child, gently insisting that she eat more. The girl pauses, her spoon hovering, as she glances back and forth between her own bowl and the woman's, clearly hesitant to take more than her share. The lady offers a reassuring smile, explaining that she is already quite full and wants the little one to finish the meal to keep her strength up. But the little girl shakes her head, stubbornly replying that if the woman is still hungry, then she feels hungry too, refusing to eat alone. With a determined look, the child firmly pushes the bowl of food back across the table toward the older woman. Touched by the little one's selfless attitude, the woman's expression softens into a warm, genuine smile as she finally agrees to share the meal with her. Their quiet moment is shattered when a series of heavy, aggressive knocks thunder against the door, signaling the unwelcome arrival of the village chief. The lady moves with panicked urgency, snatching the girl up into her arms and whispering a frantic plea for her to remain absolutely silent and just listen. Outside, the man's voice cuts through the air, announcing that the decision has been made. One of the prisoners is to be her new husband, a declaration that leaves the woman visibly shaken and pale. He follows up with a cold order, telling her to prepare herself immediately, as she will be expected to return to the mountain camp along with this new partner. A wave of pure desperation washes over the woman. She doesn't know where to turn, terrified because she absolutely refuses to endure that nightmare again. Even knowing that running away is impossible, she pulls the little girl into her chest, hugging her with a fierce, protective tightness. She realizes that even though they have only been together for a short time, she simply cannot bring herself to abandon the child to such a cruel fate. Tears stream down the woman's face as she contemplates the thought of leaving the little one behind in this desolate place. Sensing the overwhelming fear radiating from her, the little girl begins to sob, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. The dam breaks, and the girl dissolves into a fit of loud, desperate weeping, utterly overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The sharp, heartbreaking sound of the child's cries echoes through the dark, cramped house, making the air feel heavy and suffocating with dread. Now left entirely on her own, the woman huddles in the shadows, paralyzed by fear as she tries to comprehend what horrors the future holds for her. She curls herself into a tight ball on the floor, her mind spiraling as she prays that she won't have to repeat the same agonizing experiences of her past. Her memories begin to surface, dragging her back to the painful chapters of her history and the string of circumstances that led her to this wretched cabin. She gazes at the sleeping form of the little girl, struck by how hauntingly similar the child's vulnerable position is to her own childhood. The 5-year-old girl hadn't even been given a name, left orphaned and alone after the tragic passing of her father. The memory strikes home. She recalls how her own father had heartlessly traded her away, treating her life as worth nothing more than a single, cheap rabbit pelt. The trauma is vivid. She remembers the very first day she was dragged to her new cabin, only to be immediately mistreated by the man who called himself her husband. Even before she had the chance to unpack her meager belongings, the man had lashed out, inflicting pain on her before her new life had even truly begun. In that devastating moment, she realized with sinking certainty that her life of misery wasn't coming to an end. It was only just beginning. Collapsed onto the hard floor, the woman stared up as the small figure of the girl slowly crept toward her. In the absolute depths of that living nightmare, the only soul who reached out to offer her even a shred of kindness was that angelic little child. The girl crouched down, her tiny hands reaching out as she tried in her own small way to comfort the broken, weeping woman on the ground. With a gentle, innocent touch, the little girl made it clear just how much she cared, her affection acting as a brief ray of light in the darkness. Time marched on, and eventually, the man who had set off for the mountains never made his way back home. The villagers whispered that he had been lost to a pack of wolves in the hunting grounds and that he would never be seen again. When the news of his disappearance reached her, she felt an immediate, overwhelming wave of relief. Yet it was quickly stifled by a new, gnawing fear. The woman knew all too well that, as an unprotected widow in this brutal place, she was now completely vulnerable. A woman left without a husband here was like a helpless sheep wandering outside the protective fence, an easy target for anyone with malice in their heart. Driven by necessity, the two of them stepped out of the small cabin, walking hand in hand toward the heart of the village. Suddenly, the little girl came to a halt, her small arms stretching out to point toward something lingering in the distance. Her eyes went wide with a mixture of surprise and discovery, and she shouted out excitedly, drawing attention to what she had found. The woman shifted her gaze, following the girl's finger until she spotted the familiar, ominous sight of a wagon, with a prisoner locked away inside a cage. As they drew closer to the road, the young man slumped in the cage slowly raised his head to look at them. The woman's breath hitched as she realized with a start that this was the very same prisoner she had shared her food with earlier. At the same moment, the protagonist's eyes widened, his heart skipping a beat as he recognized the pair standing before him. A flood of memories, bitter, harsh, and filled with despair, came rushing back to him all at once, blurring the line between his past and this present reality. Meanwhile, the woman was reeling as well, the vivid memories of the shouting, the threats, and the physical abuse she had suffered at the hands of her husband resurfacing. She remembered the desperation in her own heart as she had fought to shield the little girl from the explosive fury of that cruel, violent man. In the prisoner's steady gaze, her own reflection seemed to mirror all the shock, confusion, and fear she was struggling to hide. Still clutching the bread in her hands, she froze in her tracks, completely paralyzed by the sudden collision of her past and this strange present. The tension was broken when the village chief appeared, his presence imposing as he demanded to know what she was doing in this area. The man barked a warning that the soldiers were arriving shortly, ordering her to head back to the village immediately. With a forced, shaky smile, she turned to the little girl, telling her that it was time they left. But the child didn't budge. She remained fixed in place, her expression filled with concern as she kept her eyes locked on the man in the cage. The prisoner, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him, simply stared at the piece of bread in his hand with a hollow, vacant look. Overcome by a gnawing, primal hunger, he finally began to eat the humble meal the woman had gifted him. Without warning, two guards shoved the cage door open, their voices booming as they yelled at the protagonist to get out. They didn't wait for him to move. They grabbed him and roughly hurled him out of the wagon, leaving him to crash hard onto the dirt ground. Sprawled on the earth, he watched in dismay as his small piece of bread rolled away into the dust from the impact of the fall. Shortly after, the three prisoners were forced onto their knees while the chief stood over them, shouting the order to begin. Before they could even react, the guard struck, cutting down the other two men with lethal efficiency. Once the deed was done, one of the guards casually wiped his bloody blade clean on a scroll. The guards then unfurled scrolls that hummed with a strange, glowing energy, leaving the protagonist baffled as he wondered what kind of dark magic he was witnessing. Completely disheartened by the senseless slaughter, the young man wrestled with the terrifying question of what kind of insane, twisted world he had been thrown into. One of the soldiers leaned in, whispering urgently to the village chief that he could smell manna on one of the prisoners. The chief spun around, his cold eyes boring into the prisoner who remained kneeling on the ground, utterly confused and still trying to comprehend his fate. The young man looked up, his face a mask of bewilderment as he tried to grasp the meaning behind the chief's intense, predatory stare. The scene cuts back to the lady's quiet cabin, where she is paid a visit by an older woman from the village. The older woman hands over some modest supplies, instructing her to make sure she has everything she needs once she returns to her home. She offers a somber warning, noting that since the man doesn't understand their language, the young woman will have to work hard to repay all these favors one day. Speaking with brutal honesty, the lady admits that no one in the village ever actually liked her late husband, and they only tolerated him because he was a skilled hunter. However, she expresses her belief that this new guy is different, especially since the soldiers explicitly identified him as a commoner. The older woman observes that while he might look rough around the edges, his hands and feet are soft, almost like those of a pampered noble. Smiling faintly, she adds that he doesn't seem like the type to hurt anyone, and if he turns out to be a good hunter, they might actually live comfortably for once. The young woman shakes her head, replying that she doesn't care for comfort. She reaches out and grips the older woman's hands with genuine, tearful gratitude. With eyes glistening, she whispers that all she truly prays for is that this new husband won't be another source of aggression and pain. It's her only dream, to finally find someone who will leave her and the little girl in peace. Nothing more, nothing less. Suddenly, A series of sharp knocks at the door startled them, accompanied by a muffled voice shouting for them to open up. Terrified, the lady instinctively pulled the little girl into a protective embrace, holding her tight as the child slept soundly in her lap. Peering intently through a narrow gap in the wall, she catches a glimpse of the protagonist as he arrives, guided closely by the village chief. The elderly chief strides into the house, his expression firm as he loudly declares that he has finally brought her a new husband. Stunned into silence, the young lady gasps in shock and asks for clarification about this supposed husband, only for the chief to command her to offer him a proper welcome. The protagonist steps inside, his brow furrowed in confusion. He glances around the room, demanding to know where they have dragged him and what exactly is going on. Terrified by the sudden intrusion, the lady recoils, frantically asking why they would bring a man who looks so sickly and unwell right into her home. She fixes her gaze on the tall, standing figure of the young man, her heart racing as she wonders if he is truly meant to be her new partner. Her eyes widen, momentarily overwhelmed by his sheer height. She realizes she has never encountered anyone quite so imposing in all her years. The man stands there, shifting uncomfortably, genuinely puzzled by the intense fear radiating from her and failing to grasp why she is reacting this way. Suddenly, a flicker of recognition crosses his face as he realizes this is the same woman who had kindly offered him a piece of bread earlier that day. Seeing her frame tremble with visible anxiety, the protagonist tilts his head, genuinely perplexed as to why she appears so frightened of his presence. Noticing his hesitation, the village chief snaps, grabbing him firmly by the arm and gruffly asking why he is just standing there like a statue. The old man gives his arm a sharp tug, forcefully pulling him closer to the corner where the lady and her young daughter are huddled together. With a decisive gesture, the chief points directly at the young man, formally presenting him to the room as the lady's new husband. He reaches out, grabbing both of their hands to pull them together, insisting that there is no need for such tension since they are now officially wed. A look of smug satisfaction spreads across the chief's face as he firmly clasps the new couple's hands together, sealing the arrangement. He beams at them, declaring that they make a perfectly beautiful couple and insisting that everything is settled and finalized. The young man is still reeling from the confusion, but his mind begins to race as he slowly starts connecting the dots of this bizarre situation. Memories rush back to him. He recalls Santa Claus's strange promise about gifting him a pure, devoted wife and a lovely little daughter. He looks at the woman before him, who trembles like a terrified rabbit, and then at the small, cute daughter curled up protectively behind her mother, looking like a tiny, frightened hamster. Jo-won stands in stunned silence, wondering if that bizarre encounter with Santa Claus was actually real, and if his ridiculous wish had somehow been granted. Even if his desire was fulfilled, he is still reeling from the absurdity of being unceremoniously dumped into this strange, unknown world. He grumbles to himself, questioning whether it was really impossible for him to receive a simple gift without having to endure such intense hardship and confusion. A wave of hot frustration washes over him, and he silently vows that if he ever manages to cross paths with that Santa Claus again, he is going to settle the score. In the theater of his own mind, he imagines himself as a hulking, furious bear, looking down at the woman and the girl who appear as defenseless, skittish creatures. Standing outside among the villagers, the young man feels entirely isolated, unable to comprehend a single syllable of the local language being spoken around him. The language barrier is driving him to the brink of insanity, as he stands there completely unable to decipher the meaning of their chatter. The village chief and two other men stand nearby, staring intently at him while their voices rise and fall in a heated discussion about his future. Suddenly, one of the villagers steps forward and extends his hand. Jo-won hesitates, wondering if this is meant to be a simple, friendly handshake. He cautiously accepts the greeting, but as their hands meet, he is taken aback by the crushing, iron-like strength of the man's grip. The villager winces, his face contorting in pain, leaving the protagonist to wonder if this bone-crushing intensity is just the standard way people greet each other here. With a contemplative expression, he watches the man, trying to make sense of the strange, high-stakes customs of this unfamiliar place. He abruptly releases the man's hand, causing the villager to stumble backward, shouting out something completely incomprehensible in his distress. As the villager complains and clutches his hand, which seems to glow faintly, the village chief bursts into laughter. He then steps forward and thrusts a bow and a quiver of arrows into the protagonist's hands. Left holding the rustic hunting weapon, he stares down at it, completely caught off guard by this unexpected offering from the elder. He turns the bow over in his hands, wondering why they are giving him such an item, though he quickly senses that this is not meant as an act of hostility. The chief begins to gesture wildly with his arms, using expressive movements in a desperate attempt to communicate his intentions. The old man mimics the long ears of a rabbit, and the meaning finally clicks in Jo-won's mind as he begins to understand what the chief is asking of him. It suddenly hits him. They aren't looking for a fight. They are desperately hoping he can use his skills to provide food for the village. The village chief's eyes widen in genuine surprise when he realizes that the newcomer has successfully deciphered his elaborate charade. With a relieved and encouraging smile, the chief points a calloused finger toward the edge of the forest, gesturing as if to lead him toward a successful hunt. Just then, a small white rabbit emerges from the brush, sitting peacefully in the grass while it nibbles on some stray leaves. The chief frantically points at the rabbit, yelling for him to take the shot, but the protagonist freezes, having absolutely no experience with a bow and arrow. He recalls seeing archery in the Olympics on television and realizes how notoriously difficult it is for a complete beginner to land a clean shot. Nevertheless, he sets his jaw, pulls back the bowstring with every ounce of strength he can muster, and forces himself to focus entirely on the target. In a sudden flash of movement, the arrow flies straight and true, striking the rabbit dead on before the animal even has a chance to flee. The chief stands frozen in total shock at the display of precision, while Jo-won stares at the outcome, wondering how on earth he actually managed that. He remains standing in the clearing, the bow still held at his side, trying to process the sheer improbability of what he just achieved. His thoughts are interrupted when he catches sight of the young woman and her little daughter, who are slowly making their way back into the clearing. A single bead of sweat trickles down his temple as he tracks their slow, hesitant approach, feeling the weight of the moment pressing in on him. Watching them draw closer, Jo-won finally comes to the dazed realization that this beautiful, mysterious woman is truly his bride. He feels a sudden, intense rush of heat flush across his face, accompanied by a strange, overwhelming emotion that starts to bubble up from deep within his chest. The surrounding villagers notice his visible reaction and exchange puzzled glances, completely baffled by what is transpiring. Soon after, the newly formed family gathers together to share their very first meal. The woman moves with quiet grace, carefully ladling portions of food into small wooden bowls for her new husband and her young daughter. It is a humble, simple stew, yet the savory aroma drifting from the pot suggests it is both incredibly tasty and packed with the nutrition they so desperately need. The young man reaches for his spoon, lifting it tentatively while he catches the woman and child watching him with an unmistakable air of nervous curiosity. He takes a deliberate bite of the stew, and the flavor clearly catches him off guard, eliciting an expression of surprise that immediately startles the two watching him. Remaining completely silent, the protagonist simply nods and keeps eating, savoring the warmth of the meal he has been provided. A small, genuine smile finally breaks across his features, a clear indicator to everyone present that he is truly enjoying the food. The very concept of a family had always felt like an abstract, distant dream to him, something he had drifted away from throughout his teenage years and well into his 30s. Yet here he is, a man who had been adrift for so long, suddenly entrusted with a family of his own to cherish, look after, and protect. He muses that it would have been ideal for these bonds to form naturally over time, but he quickly brushes that thought aside. The order of events doesn't matter to him anymore. Tilting his head to look up at the vast sky, the young man whispers a promise to eventually settle his score with Santa Claus, while simultaneously offering a sincere, quiet prayer of thanks for finally being given a real family. The very next day, the pace of life accelerates dramatically as they pack their meager belongings and set out together on a long, arduous journey. As he trudges forward carrying a heavy, bulging sack over his shoulder, he glances back and notices that the mother and daughter are struggling to keep up with his pace. The woman and her child are visibly worn out, their faces pale and expressions weary from the taxing hike along the rugged forest trail. A surge of frustration bubbles up inside him. He desperately wants to check if they are all right, but the stubborn language barrier leaves him completely unable to speak to them. Realizing the urgency of their situation, he decides then and there that he must find a way to adapt to this strange new world as rapidly as he possibly can. Memories of his mother surface in his mind, specifically her constant advice that he should never hesitate when he feels the need to protect someone dear to him. He recalls her gentle voice telling him that the very moment his heart feels the urge to shield another, he must act upon it without a second's delay. Driven by the warmth of that memory, the young man shifts his posture and continues walking, his stride filled with a newfound sense of purpose and resolve. Without warning, the two stop dead in their tracks, and the little girl begins to clutch tightly onto the hem of her mother's worn skirt. Tears well up in the child's eyes as she begins to sob from sheer exhaustion, her small legs finally giving out and refusing to carry her any further. Watching the scene unfold, Jo-won drops to his knees, offering a reassuring look and signaling that she shouldn't be afraid because he intends to carry her for a while. The child's mother immediately panics at his sudden movement, her eyes darting around as she worries about what he might do next. In a desperate bid for understanding, she blurts out a string of words in her native tongue, But he stands there, unable to grasp a single syllable. Terrified by his looming presence, the little girl's cries grow even louder. He is taken aback by their fearful reaction, realizing in regret that his serious expression must have been far more intimidating than he intended. Shaking off his initial surprise, the protagonist offers a quick, apologetic nod and, before they can protest, reaches out to scoop them both up into his arms. The woman and her daughter are left completely stunned, their eyes wide as they realize they are being lifted effortlessly off the ground. They both instinctively hold on to him, their initial shock giving way to surprise as they feel the raw, steady strength radiating from the young man's frame. He moves with surprising ease, cradling them both securely in his arms as he resumes his trek along the path. The lady is rendered completely speechless, her mind struggling to process the sudden, protective action of her new husband. Jo-won carefully adjusts their positions in his arms, ensuring they are as comfortable and secure as possible for the duration of the journey. The little girl peers up at him, her eyes filled with wonder as she softly whispers the word Avari, with a curious, hesitant tone. The young man pauses, gazing down at the child, completely unable to comprehend the meaning of the word she just spoke. With a gentle, reassuring smile meant to put her at ease, he motions for his new wife to lean in and hold onto him more tightly. He marvels at how, even with the weight of the luggage and the two of them in his arms, they feel practically light as a feather to him. He resolves that he will master their language and hone his hunting skills, ensuring that he can provide the best life possible for his new family. He understands deep down that from this moment forward, his life will be infinitely more demanding and meaningful than it ever was before. The woman watches him, tears shimmering in her eyes, profoundly touched by the unexpected display of his strength and his innate kindness. And so, the journey continues onward, with the young man pressing ahead while cradling his new family safely in his arms. Finally, they arrive at the threshold of a small, rustic cabin, where the village chief offers a final, respectful farewell. The older man turns and walks away, leaving the newly wedded couple and the little girl alone to face their new life in the house. Standing before the weathered cabin, the protagonist eyes the structure suspiciously, thinking that the place looks incredibly cold and unwelcoming. A sharp shiver races down his spine, a visceral reminder of just how much he has always loathed the biting touch of the cold. Putting his reservations aside, he steps toward the door, bracing himself as he prepares to cross the threshold into his new home. With a slow, cautious push, the hunter eases the door open, peering into the gloom of the small wooden house. Inside, the woman waits for his arrival. Her expression is tearful and etched with emotion, her hands clasped tightly together as if in prayer. Utterly confused by the solemnity of the moment, he asks her why she is crying, but she offers no answer, her gaze fixed elsewhere. Without another word, the woman darts quickly into the house, leaving the protagonist standing at the doorway, still struggling to understand what is happening. He looks past her into the interior and his heart sinks as he realizes the shelves are completely bare and the house is in a state of utter disarray. Standing frozen in the doorway, the young man feels a sharp pang of shock as his gaze sweeps across the cabin's interior. Everything inside has been completely torn apart and ransacked. Outside, the woman's voice is hollow and defeated as she explains that during her forced absence at the village, looters stripped the home of every single thing they owned. The man's brow furrows with deep concern. The bitter, biting cold of the coming season is fast approaching, and he finds himself empty-handed, with no supplies left to shelter or sustain his new family. He catches sight of his wife sitting alone on the nearby grass, her posture slumped in defeat, and he approaches her softly, murmuring that he has finally found her. The hunter lowers himself to the ground, taking a seat right beside her, and for a long moment, the only sound between them is the rustle of the wind. With a slow, tentative movement, he reaches out to gently stroke her hair, a gesture that leaves her looking at him with a mixture of profound surprise and lingering emotion. His touch is incredibly tender, carrying a quiet, soothing weight that clearly signals how much he cares about her well-being in this harsh situation. He speaks to her, his voice low and reassuring, telling her not to worry, yet the young woman sits there, pondering whether she truly understands the weight of his promise. A heavy sadness settles in her chest as the reality sinks in. This complete stranger is now the man she is bound to, the one with whom she must share her life from this day forward. Her anxiety is palpable. They have no common language to bridge the divide between them, and from what she has seen, he barely possesses the survival skills needed to provide for them. She looks around at the desolate, unforgiving landscape and wonders, with a sinking heart, if they could possibly endure living together in such a brutal place. Just then, a sudden, confident smile spreads across the protagonist's face, and he turns to look at her, his eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering determination. He makes a solemn vow, speaking with absolute certainty, promising that no matter what dangers lie ahead, he will shield her from every form of harm. Despite the gnawing doubt that had been clouding her mind, the woman finds her heart feeling surprisingly lighter as she takes in his steady, earnest expression. Even in the depths of their shared despair, she catches herself wondering why his simple, spoken promise manages to bring her such an overwhelming sense of relief. The young man takes a quiet moment to reflect on his own history, thinking back to the long, empty years he had spent entirely on his own since the day his parents passed away. He remembers how he had fought through every hardship life threw at him, always managing to pick himself up and force his way forward. Now that he finally has people of his own to care for, he feels a surge of conviction. There is absolutely no reason for him to falter, regardless of what obstacles he might face. He reiterates his vow, swearing that he will find a way to provide for them and ensure their survival, no matter the cost or the circumstances. Deeply moved by the raw sincerity in his voice, the woman finds herself unable to hold back any longer, and she begins to weep softly. Seeing her distress, the young man pulls her into his arms, holding her in a warm, protective hug, doing his absolute best to offer her solace in this fragile moment. Noticing the emotional display, the little girl breaks into a run, rushing toward them while shouting out a frantic, urgent plea in her own language. The child buries her face into her mother's side, clinging to her skirt while looking up at the man, begging him with wide eyes not to hurt Rigi. In that quiet, tense moment, the new family remains huddled together, with the mother and her daughter safely tucked into the protective embrace of their new guardian. The young man holds them both, his mind swirling as he reflects on the surreal nature of the moment, feeling the woman's tears soaking into his clothes. Beside them, the little girl continues to cry as well, her sobs echoing the confusion and fear that had gripped them all throughout this chaotic day. Countless questions race through his mind, flickering in and out of existence, but he remains acutely aware that he has no way of finding the answers right now. He renews his silent pledge, swearing that he will dedicate everything he has to making her the happiest woman alive and ensuring she never has cause to weep again. Jo-won makes a firm, internal commitment to be the best husband and father he can possibly be, determined that they will never look back on this day with regret. The scene shifts to the cabin, which now appears tidy and renovated, with a neat, generous stack of firewood piled high just outside the front door. Sitting quietly on the floor, the protagonist finds himself contemplating their dynamic, feeling as though they have been reset to square one in their relationship. He feels a strange, lingering sense of being a total stranger to them, but at the same time, this clean slate brings him an unexpected sense of peace. A sudden spark of inspiration hits the hunter. He realizes he needs a practical, simple way to begin bridging the gap and getting closer to his new family. With a clear, deliberate gesture, he draws the attention of the two, who watch him with wide-eyed curiosity, and he points a finger firmly at his own chest. The young man speaks his own name clearly and slowly, ensuring they hear every syllable so they can finally call him by it. He realizes that since they are going to share a life together under one roof, the absolute least they can do is learn each other's names. The mother and child remain seated, staring at him with expressions of genuine surprise, clearly caught off guard by this new side of their companion. With a calm, inviting motion, the protagonist extends his hand, gesturing toward the lady and asking her to share her name with him. After a brief moment of hesitation, the woman clears her throat and replies that her name is Rigi. The young man listens with intense focus, memorizing the sound. She repeats her name again, this time with more strength and clarity, and a light of realization finally flickers in the protagonist's eyes as he confirms he understands. A warm smile lights up his face, and he tells her that her name is truly beautiful before turning his gaze toward the little one. Jo-won shifts his focus to the small girl, leaning in slightly to ask her what her own name might be. The girl immediately glances toward her mother, and the atmosphere in the room grows heavy. Seeing the profound, quiet sadness in the child's eyes, the young man realizes with a jolt that she has never actually been given a name. The protagonist sits in reflective silence for a long heartbeat, his mind racing as he searches for a way to fix this missing piece of her identity. Then, with a look filled with love and warmth, he reaches a decision. He is going to give the little one a name of her very own. He decides to call her Dorothy, a name he pulls from his memories of the story of the girl from the Wizard of Oz. He tries to explain the meaning behind the name, gesturing to describe the courageous girl who travels through a strange land, finding many loyal friends along the way. He tells her that just like that character, she will surely achieve her own happiness and grow into a wonderful, lovely child. The little girl tentatively repeats her new name, and he smiles, assuring her that with him, she will always be surrounded by love and plenty of friends. A radiant, genuine smile breaks across the little girl's face, and as she embraces her new name, Dorothy, she finally seems truly, deeply happy. Just outside the threshold, the man, the one who has become her husband, stands working diligently, his rhythmic, powerful strikes with an axe ringing out as he chops through logs of firewood. From the safety of her hiding spot, Riji keeps her gaze fixed on him, her mind swirling with the realization that this man is unlike anyone she has ever encountered. He is truly a strange presence in her life. She finds herself comparing him to the man who is no longer here, noting that while the stranger possesses a much larger, more imposing frame, he treats her with a gentleness that feels completely foreign. The woman's thoughts race as she comes to a startling conclusion. This man is fundamentally different from every single person she has ever known in her difficult life. Silently, she forms his name on her lips, her heart softening as she dwells on the refined, soothing quality of his voice that stands in such sharp contrast to the harsh world she's accustomed to. As she watches him, memories of her long, painful history of suffering surface, bringing with them the bitter truth that she had never been on the receiving end of such genuine kindness before. A small, genuine smile graces her lips, and she finds herself wondering, with a mix of curiosity and confusion, why this man would choose to be so incredibly kind to her. Riji continues to observe his movements, feeling an unshakable sense that he simply doesn't belong in this place. He seems too vibrant, too out of place for their humble, isolated surroundings. Suddenly, he turns and catches her watching him. A bright, friendly smile breaks across his face, and he waves his hand high in the air, calling out her name to capture her full attention. Caught off guard, the woman gasps slightly, her eyes widening as she notices the striking depth of his black eyes and the dark hair that frames his face as he looks straight at her. The sight of him triggers a faint, distant memory of a rumor she once heard. A whisper about a war-torn country that had desperately succeeded in summoning a legendary hero. The legend was quite specific, claiming that this fabled hero would be easily recognizable by his completely black hair and piercing black eyes. With a curious, gentle expression, the protagonist begins to walk toward her, his movements relaxed as he bridged the distance between them. Riji watches him approach and thinks that, in terms of appearance, he certainly matches the description of the hero, though she quickly dismisses it, finding the idea highly improbable. She shakes the thought away, telling herself that a true hero would never end up here. It's all nothing more than a simple, baseless rumor. They find them. The lady feels her nerves fray as he steps closer, her pulse quickening until she can feel her heart hammering against her ribs as she stares back at him. Looking at him with intense focus, she confirms every detail. His hair and eyes are undeniably black, just as the legends described. A sudden wave of relief washes over her, and Riji finds herself baffled by the overwhelming sense of peace and comfort she is feeling. She struggles to understand it. Why is she feeling so incredibly relaxed and at ease around a man she barely even knows? Her own internal reaction leaves her bewildered, while Joan simply stands there observing her, clearly just as confused by the silent tension as she is. Without warning, the hunter reaches out and affectionately strokes the top of her head. The young woman freezes, finding this sudden, intimate gesture profoundly strange. Riji's mind races back to the only times men had ever touched her head in the past. It was always to inflict pain or abuse, yet she has to admit that this sensation is strangely pleasant, and a part of her secretly wishes he wouldn't stop. Immersed in a sudden feeling of safety, she wants the contact to continue, and as Jo-won notices her reaction, he blushes slightly, continuing to pet her hair with remarkable tenderness. Then, he leans in closer, and before she can even process the movement, he surprises her completely by planting a soft, gentle kiss right on her forehead. The weight of the kiss against her skin leaves the lady utterly stunned, rendering her completely speechless as she tries to comprehend such an intimate display of affection. As soon as he pulls away, he looks completely mortified, while she remains rooted to the spot, wearing an expression of pure shock, as if she had just seen a ghost. The young man is clearly drowning in awkwardness now, his face flushing as he begins to stutter, unable to form a coherent sentence to bridge the gap. In a moment of sheer panic, he reaches out and grabs a wooden bucket nearby, desperate for anything to distract himself from the mounting tension. Clutching the handle with a white-knuckled grip, he realizes he needs a reason, any reason, to escape the situation and get out of there as fast as he can. Without sparing another thought, the hunter turns and bolts, fleeing the scene and leaving his new wife behind in his haste. The woman stands there alone, her face burning a deep, vibrant red and her heart still racing uncontrollably because of his sudden, impulsive actions. As he runs, Jo-won mentally kicks himself, wondering in a panic what she could possibly be thinking about his strange, erratic behavior. He reminds himself that even though they are technically married, they only actually met today, and the reality of that leaves him feeling completely lost. To make matters worse, there is the massive barrier of their language difference. He has no idea how to explain himself, and he's left wondering what he should do next. The hunter wonders if he should just try to act as if nothing happened, as if that were even possible. Distracted by his own thoughts, he finally stops and looks around, suddenly realizing how far he has wandered and having no clue where he has actually ended up. The young man decides that the best course of action is to finish getting his water and head back to the house as quickly as humanly possible. Just as he focuses on his task, he suddenly senses an unnatural, ominous presence, and he instantly shifts into a state of high alert, his senses scanning for danger. From the deep, encroaching shadows, a massive wolf emerges, its eyes glowing with a sinister red light as it steps directly into his path. The predator bares its razor-sharp teeth, emitting a low, guttural growl that vibrates in the air, signaling that it is ready to lunge at any moment. Even as beads of cold sweat begin to form on his brow, the protagonist stands his ground, facing the beast down without showing a single shred of fear. Jo-won is momentarily stunned by the sheer, hulking size of the creature, confirming that he is staring down a real, apex predator. Remaining remarkably calm, he crouches down next to his bucket, keeping his eyes on the wolf while his hand searches the ground for a sturdy piece of wood. Without a second of hesitation, the man snatches up the thick branch, readying it as an improvised weapon to defend himself against the wolf's assault. The giant beast launches itself forward with terrifying speed, but the protagonist meets the charge head-on, jumping toward the wolf while swinging the club. The animal snaps its jaws shut around the piece of wood, its powerful teeth instantly shattering the branch into splinters. Letting out a fierce, guttural shout, the young man puts every ounce of his strength into a direct, thunderous punch aimed straight at the wild animal's skull. The blow lands perfectly, connecting with a sickening thud and sending the full force of the impact radiating through the wolf's head. But the creature isn't finished. It bites down hard on his arm, and the hunter winces, a sharp cry of pain escaping him as the fangs pierce his skin. He refuses to accept defeat. Gritting his teeth, he gathers every ounce of his remaining strength and drives another heavy punch directly into the beast. With a roar of pure determination, a brilliant, blinding blue light erupts from his fist, surging with a power he didn't know he possessed. The magical impact connects squarely with the wolf, sending the creature spiraling backward as it lets out a pained, disoriented howl. At that exact moment, his entire body suddenly ignites in a torrent of flames, and he can't help but cry out in sheer, startled agony. His eyes go wide with shock, his brow furrowing as he frantically tries to comprehend what on earth is happening to him. Even more bizarre, the wolf's own jaws seem to catch fire as it makes contact with him, leaving the young man completely baffled by the surreal scene unfolding before him. Jo-won stares down at his own arm, which is wreathed in roaring, magical fire, his expression frozen in a state of utter, paralyzed disbelief. Ignoring the pain, he lunges onto the beast's back, raining down a barrage of brutal, flame-coated punches directly onto its skull. He doesn't stop for a second, his arms a blur of motion as he hammers the animal with every bit of power he can muster. Each strike lands with devastating precision, the magical flames searing the wolf and leaving it utterly unable to find a way to defend itself. The massive predator finally collapses to the ground, lying completely motionless, while the protagonist staggers back, chest heaving and lungs burning for air. As he collapses onto the grass to catch his breath, his mind races back to the impossible sight of his arm wreathed in high, flickering flames. He frantically checks his arm and his clothes, but to his utter confusion, there isn't so much as a single singe mark or hole in his fabric. He presses a hand against his face, his heart pounding as he wonders if, in some impossible way, he just channeled actual magic. Memories of the guards flash through his mind, and it hits him. He must have gained some kind of supernatural power the moment he arrived in this world. He recalls countless stories he's read, where acquiring cheat-like powers in another world is practically a rite of passage for any protagonist. Still sprawled out on the grass, he hides his face in his hands, daring to hope that if his theory is true, then maybe he finally has a chance. Hope surging, he thrusts his hand toward the sky and shouts at the top of his lungs for a fireball. But the air remains stubbornly still. Nothing happens. He scrambles to his feet, frustration mounting as the hunter continues to wave his hands and chant, desperately trying to trigger the magic again, but it's all in vain. Jo-won goes through the motions of every fantasy spell he can think of. Firestorms, firewalls, and more. But not a single spark follows his commands. He shouts out a series of dramatic incantations, but the result is consistently empty. The magic refuses to answer his call. His expression drops into a look of dull boredom. It's clear to him now that he can't just summon this power by force of will alone. Even so, he holds on to the knowledge that it wasn't a hallucination. He can still feel that the minor wounds he sustained earlier have already begun to mend. He drifts into a daydream of building a genuinely happy life for his new family, imagining the days filled with plenty of warm, delicious food. Jo-won considers the reality of their situation. In a remote village lacking any real doctors, his newfound healing ability could be a lifeline for everyone around him. Deciding to stay level-headed, he resolves to remain calm, confident that if this power manifested once, it will surely emerge again when the time is right. Suddenly, a dark, melancholic memory pulls him away. The day of his grandfather's funeral, which came just shortly after the tragic loss of his parents. His grandfather had been perfectly healthy, yet he was stolen away in a sudden accident, and in his grief-stricken rage, his uncle had pinned the blame squarely on him. His uncle had lashed out, cruelly accusing him of being the harbinger of death responsible for the loss of his father and his only brother. He can still hear the echoes of his relatives screaming at him while he lay curled on the floor, labeling him the root of all their misfortune. They treated him like a toxic plague, convinced that his very existence brought nothing but disaster and sorrow to anyone he touched. The harsh reality of the present snaps him back. He knows he needs to drain the wolf's blood, but he can't shake the fear that the scent might attract even more dangerous predators. With time running out, the young man heaves the massive wolf onto his shoulders and begins the long trek back home. He finds himself thinking of his grandfather and the times he watched him butcher animals. That old knowledge is proving to be incredibly useful for his survival right now. Under the soft, silver glow of the moonlight, he walks on, finding a quiet comfort in the thought that his grandfather would surely be proud of his resilience. He muses over how he's going to balance training this mysterious new magic while burdened with the heavy carcass of a giant wolf on his back. Meanwhile, back inside the safety of the cabin, Rigi and little Dorothy are busy working through their evening household chores. Little Dorothy scurries across the floor, her face bright with excitement as she rushes to hand a wooden bowl over to her mother. With a warm, tender smile, Rigi thanks her daughter for the help and reaches out to stroke her hair in a gentle, loving gesture. The little girl's face lights up, a radiant, ear-to-ear smile blooming as she basks in the affection of her new family. Bubbling with newfound energy, the little girl skips and plays around the small room, absolutely thrilled with the joy of her new life. She suddenly stops dead in her tracks at the doorway, her eyes bulging in pure shock as she stares at something lurking just outside. The massive, terrifying head of the giant wolf looms into view at the entrance, and the little girl lets out a piercing, blood-curdling scream of terror. Rigi hears the desperate cry and bolts from her chores, racing toward the entrance in a panic to see what horror has befallen her daughter. Without wasting a single thought on her own safety, she snatches a sharp knife from the table, prepared to fight to the death to defend her child. As she rushes to the door, she screams for Dorothy to get behind her, her body positioning itself as a human shield against the threat. The fire in her eyes burns with a fierce, unwavering determination. She is ready to protect the little girl at any cost, even if it means sacrificing herself. She catches sight of Jo-won hauling the massive beast, and she cries out his name, her voice thick with worry and confusion about the terrifying scene. Still clutching the knife, she lunges forward, fully prepared to strike the wolf, completely unaware that the predator has long since been defeated. Hearing his wife's panicked screams, the exhausted young man finally drops the massive carcass onto the grass with a heavy thud. Seeing them rush toward him, the hunter gently calls out their names, his voice steady and calm, clearly hoping to ease the visible panic in their expressions. Rigi skids to a halt right in front of him, her hand still white-knuckled around the handle of her knife, her eyes wide as she fully registers the sight of him standing there. The tension leaves her body in an instant, and she throws her arms around him in a wave of relief. He assures her with a reassuring nod that he's all right, despite the wounds he sustained. Little Dorothy comes sprinting up, burying her face into his leg as she clutches him tightly, her small frame shaking with a mix of leftover fear and overwhelming relief. He offers them a soft, weary smile, explaining that the wolf only managed to get a bite on his arm, and insisting that everything is perfectly fine now. Bathed in the cool, pale light of the moon, the new family gathers together in the grass beside the fallen beast, while he continues to reassure them that he is truly okay. Rigi speaks a few quiet words in her native tongue, and the hunter immediately feels a heat rise to his cheeks, his face flushing crimson because he hasn't the slightest clue what she just said. Even without understanding the specific vocabulary, he catches her meaning through the warmth in her eyes and the gentle tone of her voice. He realizes she is thanking him, and a genuine, happy glow settles in his chest at her display of affection. Little Dorothy chimes in with her own muffled words, and he assumes, with a pang of guilt, that she must have been just as terrified for his safety as her mother was. The young man is hit by a wave of self-reproach. He had silently sworn to himself that he would never let them shed another tear, and yet, here he is, having already broken that promise. High above, a lone crow descends to land on the weathered roof of the cabin as the sun slips away and deep night settles over the dense, quiet forest. Inside the warmth of the home, Jo-won sets to work, drawing a sharp, keen-edged knife to begin the delicate and precise process of skinning the massive wolf. He moves with calculated caution, using the tip of the blade to carefully separate the thick, coarse pelt from the layers of meat beneath. Wiping sweat from his brow, the hunter sighs, admitting to himself that this task is proving to be far more difficult and demanding than it ever looked when his grandfather did it back in his old life. Fatigue begins to set in, and he decides that he'll have to experiment and find a more efficient way to handle this next time. With the pelt finally stripped away and the meat exposed, he focuses his remaining energy, determined to see the job through to the very end. Suddenly, he hears his name called out softly, and looking toward the entrance, he sees Regi Selhoit standing framed in the doorway. His face glistening with exertion, he repeats her name in inquiry, his heart skipping a beat as he wonders what she needs from him. The woman moves toward him, holding a wooden bucket in her hands, and the protagonist speaks her name again, his voice curious and inviting. She says something to him, and though the words are foreign, he quickly interprets her accompanying gestures. She wants him to start loading the meat into the bucket. A warm smile spreads across his face as the realization hits him. She's here to help him carry the harvest inside. The young man racks his brain, desperately trying to recall the proper way to express his gratitude in the local language of this world. He takes a breath and attempts to pronounce the word, and Regi pauses, looking at him with a glimmer of genuine surprise at his sudden effort. The lady's expression softens into a sweet, radiant smile, and he instantly realizes he must have nailed the pronunciation. A flicker of doubt crosses his mind. Did he say it wrong? And for a long, heavy moment, they just stand there in the dim light, staring at one another in awkward silence. With a soft, encouraging smile, the young woman mimics the word back to him in his own native tongue, tilting her head as if asking if she got it right. The young man lets out a sincere, appreciative laugh, thanking her for taking the time to learn even a scrap of his language. His wife seems momentarily flustered by his warmth, flushing deeply and looking down, unsure of how to handle the sudden intimacy. The hunter turns to pick up the wooden bucket, while Regi stands there in a quiet daze, reflecting on the fact that she has never, in all her life, been thanked for anything before. As she bends down to assist him with the bucket, her mind is racing. He actually thanked her for a mundane chore like fetching water, a kindness she isn't used to. Walking side by side, the woman is struck by a powerful realization. She is experiencing an endless string of firsts, all of them good, all of them centered around this man. Her thoughts drift back to the earlier moments of the day, reliving the feeling of his touch and the surprising, tender sensation of his lips against her forehead. The memory makes the blood rush to her face, a deep burn of embarrassment that causes her pulse to hammer wildly in her chest. Despite the overwhelming heat of her own shyness, she follows him into the house, her curiosity driving her to stay close to him. A small, painful seed of doubt sprouts in her heart as she wonders if he's done these things for other women in the past, and if they felt as breathless and confused as she does now. The thought brings a sharp, sudden ache to her chest, a strange, tangled mix of emotions that leaves her on the verge of tears. Inside the cabin, the man sets the bucket on the table, only to be caught off guard when she follows him inside, appearing right at his shoulder. He steps back, reflexively trying to clear space for her, finding her sudden, quiet entrance into his workspace to be quite puzzling. The young woman watches him, feeling a strange tension. In her world, chores like this were solely her domain, yet he acts as if it is his natural duty to do them. Their hands brush against each other as they both reach for the meat, and the young man stops, his gaze locking onto hers and creating a thick, electric atmosphere in the small room. The wife takes a step closer, her hands trembling and her nerves frayed, her mind spinning as she desperately tries to figure out what she's supposed to do in this heavy moment. The protagonist leans in toward her, the proximity causing her anxiety to spike even higher as she braces herself. Instead of anything more, he plants another gentle, soft kiss on her forehead. The girl is left completely stunned, her face blooming into an even deeper shade of red. She quickly retreats, cringing in pure embarrassment as she mentally kicks herself for having closed her eyes. In a state of total desperation, she grips her own hair, mortified, convinced that her husband must have thought she was leaning in for a real kiss on the lips. Face burning, she resolves that if he leans in again, she will keep her eyes open. Anything to make sure he doesn't misunderstand her intentions this time. But to her complete shock, the hunter doesn't pull away. He leans in further and plants a deep, passionate, and undeniably real kiss right on her lips. He pulls back, wearing a calm, gentle smile, while the lady remains frozen, completely paralyzed by the sheer impact of the kiss. The moment is broken when the young man turns, bucket in hand, and freezes as he notices a pair of eyes watching them from the shadows. Little Dorothy had been peeking at them the entire time, and as the realization hits her, Regi sinks into a state of utter, hopeless despair knowing her daughter saw everything. Mortified beyond words, the woman bolts from the cabin like a hurricane, leaving the protagonist standing there in a state of total confusion. Later that day, the small family takes a peaceful, quiet walk through the sun-dappled forest, with Rigi purposefully keeping a significant distance ahead. The man follows a few paces behind, carrying the wooden bucket, while little Dorothy struggles to match her pace to his long, steady strides. At that very moment, the hunter catches sight of the little girl reaching out with her small, outstretched hands, desperately trying to get a grip on the large container sitting nearby. Caught off guard and completely puzzled, the young man pauses in his tracks, tilting his head as he tries to decipher exactly what the child is after. After a brief pause, it finally clicks. She isn't trying to steal anything. She just wanted to hear her name called out loud by him. A radiant, ear-to-ear beam breaks across the little girl's face. She grips the edge of the object firmly, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose, feeling truly cherished and deeply connected to her new father. The scene shifts inside the modest cabin, where Rigi is busy attending to the giant wolf's thick pelt, gently stroking the fur as it lies spread out across the wooden floorboards. Standing just behind her, the protagonist watches the delicate process with a confused expression, wondering to himself why she would choose to dry such a large hide right here in the living quarters. But just then, a metaphorical light bulb flickers to life over his head. The pieces finally fall into place, and the true, practical reason behind her task becomes crystal clear. He realizes with a sudden jolt that this thick, incredibly soft pelt must be a prized and essential treasure for his new wife. Almost immediately, little Dorothy scampers over toward her mother, peering down at the massive, fuzzy rug with wide-eyed curiosity. The child simply cannot help herself. She reaches out to run her tiny fingers through the dark, dense fur of the beast, clearly amazed and enchanted by how incredibly soft and plush the giant animal's coat feels to the touch. Observing the heartwarming scene of the mother and daughter smiling in unison, the young man feels a wave of genuine warmth wash over his chest, grateful to see his new family so safe, content, and happy together. The perspective transitions back to the exterior, framing the quaint little wooden cabin as it sits nestled deep within the dense, towering trees of the mountain forest. Inside the cabin, Rigi is focused and methodical, her hands moving with precision as she carefully massages coarse salt into two thick, tender slabs of meat to preserve them. Watching her intently, the young man begins to grasp the nuances of how meat is cured and stored for the winter, deciding right then that he needs to master these skills. A soft smile plays on the young woman's lips, clearly pleased that she has managed to save every bit of that useful, precious fat. As he watches her work, the hunter can't help but reflect on his own situation, realizing just how much he still has to learn to survive and thrive in this strange, unfamiliar world. His gaze drifts back to the luxurious wolf pelt. He makes a silent vow to quickly understand how the economy works here and just how much valuable trades like these are worth in this land. Feeling restless, the man stretches his limbs out wide, concluding that his recovery time is sufficient. It is high time he stopped idling and got down to some real work. With a sudden burst of energy, he lunges to his feet, a quick movement that catches his wife off guard and leaves her visibly startled where she stood just behind him. Clearly concerned, the lady begins waving her hands in a gentle protest, urging her husband to settle back down and give his body more time to properly rest and recuperate. The young man merely offers a reassuring smile, waving off her concerns with a confident gesture to show that he is feeling perfectly fine and is completely free of any lingering pain. With a tender, reassuring touch on her shoulder, the hunter promises his wife that he knows his limits and absolutely will not push himself past the point of exhaustion. He then turns on his heel and heads for the door, leaving the young lady standing there, rendered momentarily speechless by his sudden display of determination and thoughtful care. Making his way through the dense underbrush of the forest, the man eventually stumbles upon a massive, sturdy tree that looks like the perfect target to test out his swing. He catches a glimpse of his own determined reflection in the blade of the axe. Despite having no formal experience, he decides to trust fully in the raw, overwhelming strength coursing through his limbs. Wasting absolutely no time, the protagonist grips the handle of the heavy tool with both hands, planting his feet firmly and coiling his muscles in preparation for a powerful strike. With a resounding shout of effort, he brings the heavy iron blade down with every ounce of his raw power. The impact is staggering. The force is so immense that the entire tree snaps clean through instantly, crashing down onto the forest floor with a thunderous boom. Startled by the sheer magnitude of the destruction he just caused, the young man shrinks back, instinctively shielding his head with his arms, completely baffled by the explosive results of his own swing. Sometime later, the front door of the cabin creaks open, and the husband steps inside, lugging a massive, overflowing basket filled to the brim with freshly chopped firewood. Taking in the sight of the staggering haul, the mother and daughter stop in their tracks, their eyes wide with genuine shock at the incredible speed and brute strength the hunter has displayed. As the husband hauls the heavy, oversized wooden basket into the center of the room, the young woman rushes over to him, her expression a mix of worry and relief, eager to welcome him home after his hard work. Exhausted from the physical toll of his labor, the protagonist suddenly sinks down onto the floor, a move that leaves his wife visibly confused by his sudden collapse. The lady quickly reaches out to take his hands, her brow furrowed in concern as she asks if he's injured himself, but the hunter is quick to calm her, assuring her with a smile that he is perfectly fine. Just then, little Dorothy toddles into view, holding out a soft cloth to her new father, eager to help him wipe the thick beads of sweat dripping down his face. No sooner has she finished that task than the little girl bolts off, racing excitedly across the room with a burst of energy that leaves the young man sitting there, completely mesmerized by her joyful spirit. She makes a beeline for a large wooden bucket, plunging both of her tiny hands into the cool, clear water, giggling with pure, unadulterated delight as she splashes about. With a playful squeal, the child turns and dashes back toward the hero, her tiny, wet feet leaving a series of faint, damp footprints scattered across the wooden floor. Without any warning, the little girl launches herself directly onto the big guy's chest, leaving clear, wet imprints of her tiny palms pressed against his clothes. The protagonist is caught completely off guard, his eyes widening in surprise for a split second before a broad, genuine smile spreads across his face, absolutely charmed by his little girl's spontaneous playfulness. Watching the entire exchange unfold, Rigi lets out a hearty, infectious laugh. The mood inside the small cabin lifts instantly, becoming incredibly lighthearted and filled with genuine warmth. The little one stares up at the man, her eyes shining bright and wide, eagerly waiting to see how he will react to her little game. With profound tenderness, the father gently pats the girl's head, whispering his thanks to her for taking such good care of him. However, the little girl is far too excited to sit still. She gets a case of the zoom eyes and begins sprinting laps around the kitchen while he playfully begs her to slow down. At the sight of her boundless energy, the young man and his wife both burst into uncontrollable laughter, feeling as though this quiet, perfect moment of domestic bliss is too good to be true, like a beautiful dream they never want to wake up from. He pulls the young woman into a warm, grounding hug, making a silent, firm promise to himself that he will do whatever it takes to protect these smiles. He never in his life imagined he could be this genuinely happy. The camera pans outward to show the small, rustic cabin, now silhouetted against the backdrop of the vast, lush forest that surrounds them. A thick, steady stream of smoke curls up from the stone chimney, a comforting sign that night has fully fallen and a warm dinner is ready and waiting inside. Inside the dimly lit cabin, the two adults are enjoying a hearty, well-deserved feast, while their daughter has drifted off into a peaceful, deep sleep right there on the floor. Suddenly, Rigi and her husband both freeze mid-bite, their attention caught by a soft, rhythmic little noise coming from beneath the dining table. It turns out sweet little Dorothy has succumbed to her exhaustion, falling sound asleep right in the middle of their wonderful meal, still clutching her spoon tightly in her hand. Faced with such an adorable sight, the couple shares a knowing look and bursts into quiet, gentle laughter, savoring the serene and intimate moment together. Moving with the utmost care, the hero leans down, sliding his arms under the sleeping girl to lift her up gently, ensuring he doesn't disturb her slumber in the slightest. He stands up slowly, cradling the small child securely in his arms, feeling his wife's loving, affectionate gaze fixed on them both. Carrying the little one close to his chest, the big guy slowly approaches the crackling fireplace, positioning them both near the warmth to ensure she stays cozy and comfortable in the cool night air. With the utmost care and tenderness, the new father leans down, placing the sleeping girl onto the bed as if she were made of the most delicate glass, ensuring not a single movement wakes her. The night deepens, wrapping the silent forest in a blanket of darkness, while the soft, amber glow from a lantern illuminates only the small pantry tucked away outside the main cabin. Inside the pantry, Rigi works quietly, boiling a cloth in a steaming pan of hot water, methodically cleaning and sanitizing the various household items to keep their living space tidy. Without making a sound, her husband moves through the kitchen, appearing suddenly behind her like a shadow in the dim, flickering light. Without a word of warning, the hunter reaches out, his large hand gently clasping her wrist to stop her from continuing her chores. Startled by the unexpected contact, the young woman spins around, her eyes widening in surprise as she stares up at him, completely unsure of what to make of his sudden gesture. A faint flush of crimson colors the young man's cheeks, and he holds her gaze with a profound, lingering intensity that thickens the air with romance. They stand frozen in the cramped, dimly lit room, trapped in a bubble of shared intimacy. Summoning every ounce of her courage, the lady slowly raises her hand, holding the fresh, clean cloth to gently dab the lingering beads of sweat from the big guy's neck. Her movements are incredibly soft and rhythmic, a silent testament to the deep affection and care she is beginning to feel for him as they stand close enough to share each other's warmth. Deep down, she struggles to push away her rising embarrassment, reminding herself that tending to her partner's needs is the natural, honorable duty of a devoted wife. Carried away by the swell of her own emotions, she carefully lifts the hem of her husband's shirt, beginning to wipe the sweat from his well-defined, muscular abdomen. The protagonist stands still, his eyes fixed on her as he silently observes her unexpected, tender behavior, ultimately deciding to simply let himself be cared for. A calm, sweet smile settles onto the hunter's features, a clear reflection of the genuine contentment he feels in this quiet, domestic moment. Reality suddenly crashes back in, and the lady finally processes exactly what she is doing. She recoils, her hands waving frantically as she burns with mortified embarrassment. Seeing how cute her panicked reaction is, the hero reaches out to affectionately capture her hands, his grip firm yet gentle, intended solely to soothe her frantic nerves. As he holds her hands with deep tenderness, he leans in, bringing his face closer to hers until there is barely any space left between them. Her heart begins to hammer wildly against her ribs, the sheer proximity of him leaving her breathless and jittery with a mix of nerves and excitement. Breaking the heavy, tension-filled silence, the young man lowers his voice to a soft, husky murmur, suggesting that perhaps it is time for them both to turn in for the night. The new couple walks together, hand in hand, stepping out into the cool night air toward the small, softly lit room on the outskirts of the property. Once inside, they both settle onto the wooden floor, lying down face to face with a single, glowing lamp placed between them to light the space. The hero slowly begins to lean over her, causing the young woman to swallow hard as she feels the atmosphere in the room shift and heat up. She gazes up at him with wide, shimmering eyes, a flicker of nervous hesitation dancing across her expression as she wonders what the next moment might bring. Taking a deep, steadying breath, the wife closes her eyes, consciously trying to let go of her tension and prepare herself for the gentle touch of her partner. He leans in to press a kiss to her lips, a gesture so sweet it catches her off guard. He lingers there for a moment, silently marveling at the incredible softness of her skin. Glancing over at the little girl sleeping soundly nearby, the big guy is struck by a powerful surge of desire, wishing with all his heart for his newfound family to remain by his side for many years to come. Deep in his mind, he makes a silent, earnest plea to the heavens, begging that these two precious people be kept safe and happy until his very last breath. Meanwhile, Rigi's thoughts drift to the noble families of this world, who dwell in sprawling, grand castles filled with endless rooms and luxuries. Yet, she knows the reality for the common folk is vastly different, often forcing entire families to crowd into the same cramped, modest space night after night. Because of these close quarters, it doesn't take long for children in such families to discover the private lives of their parents during the night. Suddenly, a wave of painful, haunting memories floods her mind, bringing back the chilling, aggressive voice of her late father from years ago. She vividly recalls hiding under her thin covers as a child, forced to listen to her mother's heartbroken, muffled sobbing that lasted until the early light of dawn. The young woman remembers the constant, paralyzing terror she felt in those moments, haunted by the grim fear that such a dark and hopeless future was destined to be her own. But then, the rhythmic, comforting crackle of the fireplace snaps her out of the past, bringing her back to the peaceful reality of the bright, new morning. Waking up in the bed, the lady blinks, feeling completely confused. She vividly remembers falling asleep on the hard, cold floorboards the previous night. She soon realizes that her husband must have moved her, having offered his own arm as a pillow for her throughout the night, leaving her deeply moved by his quiet, selfless care. A long, shaky sigh of relief escapes her lips as she comes to the beautiful realization that the nights spent with this man are nothing like the nightmare she once feared. Clinging tighter to his broad, steady chest, she reflects on how profoundly her entire world has shifted for the better since she joined her life with his. With a serene, contented smile, the lady snuggles deeper into his embrace, savoring the comforting, radiating warmth of the strong man beside her. Shortly thereafter, the hunter slowly begins to stir, waking to the realization of his new wife nestled affectionately against him. He notices that both the woman and the little girl are still resting soundly, using his arms as a pillow while they continue their slumber. The young woman's heart is hammering away in her chest, thumping so rhythmically and fast that it feels like it might just leap right out of her mouth. Filled with a warmth that seems to glow from the inside out, she makes a silent, fervent wish that this simple, beautiful moment could last forever. The big guy watches them both in comfortable silence, fully enjoying the tranquility of the morning before carefully shifting to rise and covering his little daughter with a warm, thick blanket. He follows this by gently stroking the child's soft, blonde hair, smiling as she lets out a small, sleepy mumble in her dreams. A little later, Riji heads toward the fireplace, intending to pick up the empty metal bucket to start the day's chores. But before her fingers can even brush the object, the young man reaches out and wraps his massive hand around the handle, taking it from her. Caught by surprise, the lady instinctively steps back a pace, watching as her husband turns to her with a smile that is incredibly soft and kind. Bursting with vitality, the hunter fills the large container to the brim, the water splashing playfully and spilling over the edges as he handles it with ease. With a calm, serene look on his face, he speaks a few gentle words in the unique, native language of this strange world. The wife stands there in total confusion, blinking up at him as she desperately tries to decipher the meaning behind what the man just said. Her face flushes a deep, burning crimson, and she mumbles something unintelligible under her breath. The young man stands there, blinking, failing to grasp the reason for her sudden, intense shyness. He wonders to himself if it was the overly affectionate way he had addressed her that caused such a nervous reaction, leaving her flustered and tongue-tied. A realization slowly dawns on him. She is embarrassed by the mere act of being treated like a proper wife, the weight of the term clearly catching her off guard. Thinking it might ease the tension, the husband suggests they use a cute nickname instead. The young woman, her face still radiating heat, softly asks to be called darling. As soon as the hunter tests the word out loud, calling her darling, she practically turns the color of a ripe tomato, overwhelmed by the sheer affection of the new nickname. She quickly pivots, turning her back to him in a desperate attempt to shield her burning face, though the deep red spreading down her neck makes her nervousness impossible to hide. He finds her mortified reaction undeniably adorable, and a playful thought crosses his mind. He suddenly feels a mischievous urge to tease her just a little bit more. With a gentle, teasing smile, the young man reaches out to lightly touch her back, softly coaxing her to turn around and look him in the eyes once again. Without warning, little Dorothy stirs awake, rubbing at her eyes and letting out a long, rumbling yawn. In her sleepy, half-conscious state, her mind begins to wander, conjuring up a dream of a massive, delicious piece of meat floating just inches from her face. She begins to drool at the imaginary feast, her stomach letting out a loud, insistent growl that signals her hunger. Suddenly, the little girl drops onto the wooden floorboards, scrambling toward the couple with frantic, clumsy energy. She scampers forward and lunges into her parents' arms, giggling and shouting out the name of her new family with pure, unbridled excitement. The two adults are completely caught off guard by the sudden burst of morning energy, but they can't help but smile, heartened to see her so bright and lively. However, the little girl's mind is locked onto the real food on the table. Her eyes sparkle with pure joy as she spots the leftover meat, her hunger taking center stage. She makes a determined attempt to climb up a large wooden bucket, her parents watching the scene unfold with warm, indulgent smiles. The protagonist lets out a hearty, booming laugh when he hears his daughter bellowing for food with every ounce of strength her tiny lungs can muster. With her little legs kicking uselessly in the air, she struggles to reach the bottom of the container, desperate for a snack. Watching her fierce appetite, the hunter makes a silent, internal vow to work his hardest as a provider so his house will never go without. He strides through the dense shadows of the forest, his axe gripped firmly in his hand, feeling emboldened and ready to take on any fierce wolf that crosses his path. Now equipped with a far more reliable weapon, the young man moves with purpose, fueled by the unwavering determination to bring sustenance back to his family. But then, the mood shifts in an instant. The protagonist freezes, sensing a strange, heavy presence lurking just out of sight amidst the dark, towering trees. He halts his steps, keenly aware that the air around him has grown stifling and thick, charging the atmosphere with a palpable, unsettling dread. At that moment, the hunter wonders in the back of his mind what kind of monstrous beast might be lurking nearby, waiting to test his resolve and his strength. Suddenly, the crunch of footsteps echoes through the silence of the dark forest, and a mysterious, shrouded figure begins to emerge, slowly closing the distance to the protagonist. Confused and wary, the hero feels a chill run down his spine, his brow breaking into a cold sweat as he frantically tries to figure out who would be wandering through such a desolate, isolated stretch of woods. From the shifting shadows, an old man in a hooded cloak appears. Seeing the stranger, the big guy instinctively tightens his grip on his axe, bracing for a potential confrontation. The stranger remains motionless, his face obscured by the deep hood as he fixes a stern, calculating gaze on the young man, analyzing him in total, heavy silence. The young man holds his ground, his mind racing with questions about who this mysterious, aged figure standing before him might be and what he wants. The story shifts back in time, revealing the old man, known as Bloodstained, as he stands amidst the rocky terrain of that same forest. Standing exactly where he is now, the elderly man studies the massive, deep indentations on the ground, concluding that a truly giant beast had passed through the area quite recently. He reflects on how he has been monitoring the cabin for several days, leading him to the firm conclusion that the new resident doesn't even know the basics of how to wield a weapon. The old man kicks a rock in frustration, finding it completely absurd and unbelievable that a raw, ignorant rookie managed to take down such a formidable monster. The gentleman shakes his head with a faint, cynical smile, knowing that even a seasoned, experienced hunter would have struggled to survive such a fight alone. He whips his head around sharply, a prickle of suspicion running up his spine. He can sense that there is something fundamentally wrong, something deeply curious about this entire situation. Driven by mounting doubt and a need for answers, the man decides to trek through the woods, determined to uncover the objective truth with his own eyes. Back in the present, the visitor continues his slow approach, while the hunter keeps his muscles coiled, maintaining a strictly defensive posture. The old man's gaze drops to the protagonist's previously injured arm, and a glimmer of genuine surprise lights up his eyes when he notices something extraordinary. He spots the distinct, deep marks of the wolf's fangs and is visibly shocked to realize that the wound has healed with impossible speed. He knows from years of experience that a bite of that magnitude would normally lead to a lethal infection, ensuring the victim would never walk properly again. A wild, nonsensical conclusion forms in the old man's mind. He begins to suspect that this big man standing before him is actually a practitioner of magic. He recalls that individuals gifted with such arcane abilities are incredibly rare in this world, and it is almost unheard of to encounter one out in the wild. The young man stands still, sweating nervously, while the mysterious elder plots a grand, silent strategy in the back of his mind. Without warning, the old man's eyes ignite with a terrifying, vibrant purple hue, and a thin, cruel smile stretches across his face as he declares that his golden opportunity has finally arrived. Deep in his thoughts, the elder revels in the realization that the long-awaited chance for the revenge he has craved for so many years has finally knocked on his door. The newcomer looks the stranger up and down, his eyes narrowing as he tries to decipher what kind of lunatic he is dealing with. Diving into the recesses of his own past, the old man remembers that despite the stubborn, bitter soul he has become, he was once a vigorous and capable warrior. In those days, soldiers were forced to fight in endless wars to earn merit and swear vassalage to the local nobility just to get ahead. Desperate to forge his own path, the young man had abandoned his father, traveling through village after village with the singular dream of becoming a legendary hunter. Not long after, he secured a position as a guardian in a village nestled near mountains that were rumored to be teeming with valuable resources. However, the only true challenge of the area was the scarcity of firewood, as even the common folk were permitted to enter the Lord's protected forest. Because of this, villagers were forced to venture deeper into the woods, which served as the perfect, convenient excuse for him to map out the vast, unknown terrain. Yet, the warrior made a fatal mistake. He never once stopped to wonder why the local villagers were only ever willing to gather wood from the shallow, outer reaches of the forest. Collapsed on the ground, battered and in pain, his mind flashes back to the crushing reality of failing his entrance trial. To stand as a guardian, a man's body must be whole. But here he is, broken, and with it, his dream of defending these lands slips through his fingers. A cold, prickling sweat breaks out over his skin as pure terror takes hold. Staring into the abyss of his current situation, the young man realizes with horrifying clarity that he could never have anticipated the nightmare currently unfolding before his eyes. Suddenly, a hulking, green-skinned monstrosity looms over him. The creature's mere presence confirms the most dreaded local legend. These grotesque, towering beasts are the undisputed masters of the mountain's heights. The situation takes a darker turn as the true horror comes to light. These vile, predatory beasts hunt down and abduct human women, dragging them away to serve as twisted breeding stock for their own abominable kind. Roughly seized by the shoulder, the guard's confusion finally clears. He looks around at the grim, oppressive surroundings, and the haunting reputation of the village of monsters finally makes gruesome, crystal-clear sense. His body trembles uncontrollably, racked by a deep, hollow dread. He has just learned the brutal truth of this region, finally understanding the tragic, dark reason behind the constant, silent disappearance of the village girls. For years, the hunter has languished in a state of miserable survival. He remains in the shadows, waiting with infinite, burning patience for the day he can finally exact his vengeance upon the creatures that shattered his entire world. Despite harboring a deep, simmering hatred for the cowardly villagers who refused to stand with him, he chose to suppress his pride. For decades, he has remained among them, enduring the quiet indignity of their presence. Hot, bitter tears of rage blur his vision. He is sustained entirely by a singular, consuming obsession, to hunt down and systematically annihilate every single one of those scoundrels before his time is up. Gripping a burning torch, the survivor issues a silent, solemn oath. He vows that he will not find rest, nor will he draw his final breath, until he has razed every one of their infested nests to the ground and turned them into nothing but ash. Shifting back to the present, the elderly hunter fixes his gaze on the newcomer. There is a newfound flicker of hope in his eyes. He is absolutely convinced that the strong, young man is the answer to his lifelong prayers. The old man studies the giant before him, clearly awestruck by his massive, towering build. He has spent a lifetime in these woods, yet he has never encountered raw, monstrous strength quite like this. Beyond the sheer physical size, the veteran is visibly stunned by what he sees on the boy's arm. That unnatural, rapid healing ability is unlike anything he has ever witnessed in a human being. It is in this moment that the gentleman reaches his conclusion. This young man possesses the latent, godlike potential to evolve into the most formidable monster hunter the world has ever known. Deep in his mind, the veteran knows a sobering truth. Even with all the power in the world, the most dangerous, bloodthirsty creatures are still lurking in the deepest, most shadowed corners of these mountains. With grim certainty, the old man understands the cycle. The monsters are merely biding their time. As soon as their current supply of captives dwindles, they will inevitably descend upon the village once more. But the veteran has a plan to forestall that tragedy. He resolves that he will mold this outsider, shaping him into an elite warrior capable of turning the tide against the beastkin. To ensure his plan succeeds, he knows he must move carefully. He intends to keep this incredible specimen, this beast head, a closely guarded secret until the ink is dry on a binding, formal contract. A sharp, cunning smile tugs at the corner of his lips. The master knows the weight of such an agreement. It will serve as the perfect chain to keep this impulsive rookie from fleeing the moment things get difficult. The old man mutters a series of guttural, unfamiliar words. Our hero listens intently, and though he doesn't understand the language, he offers a deep, respectful bow to acknowledge the weight of the moment. Watching the interaction with a hawk's eye, the veteran notes the rookie's stance. He hasn't let his guard down for a second. His weight remains shifted back, prepared to react at a moment's notice. The gentleman speaks with finality. From this day forward, he will pass down every scrap of knowledge, every secret technique, and every survival instinct he has accumulated to his new apprentice. The veteran's tone is full of absolute conviction, promising greatness. For the protagonist, however, the message is overwhelming, leaving him blinking in confusion as he tries to process the sudden change in his destiny. Morning light streams into the cabin, signaling a new day. The big guy stretches, feeling like he barely closed his eyes before the sun started peeking through the rafters. Outside, their visitor waits with ironclad patience, having decided it wasn't his place to intrude on the family's private quarters. The old man is calculated in his distance. He has no desire to let strangers, not even his own apprentices, grow too comfortable entering the home where the two women will be left vulnerable and alone. Startled by the early morning presence, the man of the house peers through the wooden doorway. He finds the hooded figure waiting in the yard, but the old man greets him with a look that is far too suspicious, radiating a strange, ulterior motive that puts the family man on edge. Seeing that unsettling grin, a cold sweat breaks out on the hero's neck, instantly reminding him of a soul-crushing HR manager during a high-stakes meeting. He wastes no time, throwing on his pack and quickly turning his gaze away, feigning total ignorance of the old man's obvious malice. Just then, his wife calls out to him. Her voice is soft but trembles with nervousness, and a faint blush colors her cheeks as she busies herself, lovingly packing a snack for her husband's journey. Watching the tender interaction, the big guy feels his own face heat up. A wave of warmth washes over him as he realizes just how incredibly precious his new wife truly is. The young woman seems entirely flustered by the intimacy of the moment, while the little girl watches the scene unfold, her eyes wide with a quiet, curious intensity. Without warning, The blonde-haired child bolts across the creaking wooden floor. She skids to a halt right in front of the hunter, throwing her arms wide in a spontaneous, eager gesture that leaves him completely stunned. A sweet, innocent smile lights up her face as she holds out the packed lunchbox. Meanwhile, the mother looks on from the background, her hands clasped tightly as she tries to contain her nervous anticipation. The young woman steps in, helping her husband settle his heavy backpack. She murmurs a request for him to take care of himself and eat well, and the protagonist can't help but smirk. The feeling of having a family genuinely worry for his well-being is something truly special. Before he steps out into the wilderness, the girl says a few words in her native tongue. The man can't parse the language, but the earnest look in her eyes tells him everything he needs to know. It is a heartfelt plea for his safe return. Eager to connect, the hero points toward the lady and tentatively repeats the phrase. His effort is clumsy, but it is enough to make his wife's eyes widen in genuine surprise at his willingness to learn. The beautiful woman's expression softens into a gentle, radiant smile. She nods slowly, a silent confirmation that he hit the mark and captured the pronunciation perfectly. Sensing the moment, the little daughter reaches out with a tiny hand, desperate to be a part of their goodbyes. She pipes up, repeating the exact same phrase, a sweet, childlike wish for his safety, and the young man is absolutely melted by her adorable innocence. Beaming with joy, the hunter gives a cheerful wave to the little girl. He promises them both, with absolute certainty, that he will return home as soon as he can, completely safe and sound. Mother and daughter stand in the doorway, waving with frantic, infectious excitement, bidding a long farewell to the man who has become the protector of their small, quiet world. However, the second his eyes fall upon the mysterious old man waiting in the forest, his expression shifts. A heavy, lingering thought crosses his mind. He would give anything to just stay home right now. Even against every fiber of his being, the hero lets out a long, weary sigh and resignedly accepts his reality. He knows that in this harsh world, he has no choice but to hunt if he wants to survive. The two men trek deep into the thick, overgrown forest. Hour after hour passes under the canopy, and the young man begins to lose track of time entirely. Fatigue starts to settle into his bones, and his patience begins to wear thin. He can't help but wonder what exactly this old geezer is hiding, and why he felt the need to drag him on such an exhausting, grueling hike. Without any warning, the veteran stops dead in his tracks in the middle of a narrow, shadowed path. The abrupt halt catches the rookie completely off guard, leaving him confused and searching for the reason behind the pause. The old man taps his foot sharply against the packed dirt. The protagonist stares down, wondering if this is some kind of cryptic signal, a sign that he needs to look closer at what lies beneath their feet. The mysterious, cloaked figure continues his rhythmic march through the dense woods, setting a relentless, demanding pace for their journey. The protagonist follows close behind, but something catches his eye. He pauses, his brow furrowing in confusion as he studies the trail left by the elder's stride. He realizes with a start that the footprints left in the soft earth are anything but ordinary. The shape they leave in the dirt is bizarre, almost alien to his eyes. His curiosity piqued, the young man wonders if he is looking at the remnants of some secret, high-level martial arts technique that he has never even heard of. A spark of determination ignites within him. He realizes that if he ever wants to master this hidden art, he has to do more than just follow. He has to imitate every subtle movement of the master's feet. Without a moment's hesitation, the big man shifts his stance, bracing his feet against the earth. He intently watches the veteran, doing his absolute best to mirror the subtle, curious technique he just witnessed. A faint, approving smirk touches the elder's lips. He glances back over his shoulder, clearly pleased to see the raw determination and focused effort radiating from his new apprentice. The two men press onward, trekking deeper into the dense, ancient woods. Sunlight filters through the thick canopy above in dappled beams, illuminating their path as they venture further into the wilderness. As they walk, the veteran continues his tutelage, pausing to press his hand against the bark of a towering tree. He explains that each mountain has its own unique ecosystem, identifying the subtle differences in the species that thrive here. The lesson deepens as they stop in a clearing. The old man makes the rookie kneel, forcing him to understand the complex terrain by having him sketch a detailed map directly into the dirt with his fingers. Miles away, the atmosphere at the cabin has turned sour. The hero's wife finds herself cornered, surrounded by three men from the village whose faces are twisted into expressions of pure, malicious intent. Without a word of warning, a cowardly, blonde-haired man lashes out, striking the young woman across the face. He sneers at her, viciously claiming she needs to be put in her place. The force of the blow is staggering. The fragile woman is sent reeling, her body collapsing violently as she hits the hard, unforgiving wooden floorboards with a sickening thud. Wincing in agony, the poor woman struggles to find her breath, panting desperately as she tries to regain her senses. She frantically turns her head, and her heart stops. She is paralyzed with terror to see her little daughter shivering in the shadows of the corner. Looking into her daughter's wide, trembling eyes, the mother feels a cold, numbing dread wash over her. She is no longer concerned for herself. She is gripped by a singular, paralyzing fear for her child's survival. Despite the pain and the sheer terror rattling her bones, the mother desperately tries to rise, her maternal instincts kicking in as she struggles to find a way to shield little Dorothy from the predators. Little Dorothy is frozen in place, her eyes wide with shock. She watches the scene unfold in silence, completely unable to grasp the reason for such sudden, irrational cruelty. Tears begin to stream down the girl's face. In her young mind, she is overwhelmed with guilt, naively blaming her own behavior for the violence being unleashed upon her home. The vandals erupt in cruel, mocking laughter as they tower over the fallen woman. They have no fear of consequences, believing they are safe because the mountain's protector, the girl's father, has no way to communicate or understand their language, and they expect their victim to stay silent. One of the thugs hesitates, whispering a warning that being caught would spell disaster, as skilled hunters are incredibly difficult to cross. The blonde man ignores him, grabbing the woman's arm and dragging her toward the door, suggesting they haul her deep into the dark forest, where no one will ever hear her screams. With a sharp tug, the villain barks orders at his cohorts to ransack the place for anything of value. He then jerks the young woman upright, forcefully hauling her away from the safety of her cabin. He pauses at the threshold to spit out a venomous threat. He warns that if she dares to speak a word of this to her husband upon his return, he will make sure the entire house is burned to the ground with them inside. The scoundrels celebrate their plunder with jeers, dragging the struggling woman into the trees. They leave little Dorothy behind in the gathering gloom, completely abandoned in the dark. Huddled in the corner, the little girl trembles uncontrollably. The reality of the situation settles in like a lead weight. She knows with a chilling certainty that something horrific is about to happen to her mother. A sob escapes her lips, escalating into a full breakdown. She cries for her mother, the only person who has ever truly cared for her, wondering if she will ever see her again. Back in the depths of the forest, the big man takes a moment to rest on a large, jagged rock. The veteran watches him from a distance, his expression unreadable, calm, serene, and deeply focused. The master reaches into his worn leather satchel to retrieve something. The rookie leans forward, his curiosity piqued by the old man's deliberate, measured movements. With calm, steady hands, the elder reveals a small, intricately carved wooden object. The hero stares at it, completely bewildered as to what purpose it serves. After a long silence, the old man nods, giving his apprentice permission to finally take a break and eat the lunch he brought with him. A bright, genuine smile breaks across the hero's face as he opens the package. He is flooded with memories of the love and care his family poured into preparing this meal for him. He takes in the contents of the lunchbox with immense joy, feeling like the luckiest man alive to have such a sweet, devoted family waiting for him. The savory scent of the meat and fried egg hits him, and his stomach rumbles in protest. He sighs with appreciation, marveling at the wonderful, comforting aroma of a home-cooked meal in the middle of the wilderness. Without warning, the veteran snaps his head toward him, giving a sharp, urgent signal. He orders the young man to close the container immediately for the sake of their survival. The hero is left completely bewildered by the sudden shift in tone. He stares at the veteran, desperately trying to figure out what he could have possibly done to warrant such a stern, sharp rebuke. The veteran explains in a low, serious tone that the intoxicating scent of cooked food acts like a beacon, drawing dangerous beasts to their location from miles away. The protagonist slumps, his spirits dampening. He feels a pang of disappointment, realizing that this meager meal was likely his only chance to savor a piece of his home while on this grueling trek. Just as he resets his focus, they arrive before a secluded, humble wooden cabin. The master gestures toward it, stating plainly that this structure is to be his new living quarters. The old man produces a bow, but it is like nothing the hero has ever seen. It is perfectly straight, lacking the curvature of any weapon he's familiar with, and he finds it incredibly strange. The hero reflects on his own experience, noting that every hunting weapon he has ever handled was built with a distinct, ergonomic curve to provide leverage. Staring at the rigid, straight object, the big man is deeply skeptical. He can't fathom how anyone could possibly draw or aim something that looks so fundamentally wrong. The mysterious old man mutters something in his guttural native tongue and thrusts the bow into the young apprentice's hands, signaling for him to hold it. Without offering any advice, the master turns his back and begins walking across the tall grass. The rookie stands there, still staring at the bow, genuinely doubting that it could even function as a weapon. The veteran takes his position, preparing to demonstrate. The protagonist watches his muscles bunch and realizes with a jolt that it must require an incredible, almost inhuman amount of strength to pull a string of that tension. With effortless precision, the old man lifts the straight weapon. He draws the string back, the arrow pointed toward the canopy, his focus absolute. Even as he pulls against the immense resistance of the bow, the experienced hunter doesn't quiver. He stands perfectly still, as if the very air around him has frozen in time. Without the slightest warning, he releases. The arrow screams through the air, traveling at a lethal, blinding speed before slamming deep into the heart of a large tree trunk. The impact is thunderous. The shaft of the arrow vibrates in the wood, and splinters erupt from the bark, scattering across the forest floor from the sheer kinetic force. Awed by the raw power and precision of the technique, the young man finally grasps the potential of this exotic equipment. Filled with new resolve, he mimics the master's stance, preparing to channel every ounce of his energy into a shot of his own. The little old man drifts over, beginning to adjust the newcomer's arm and posture to ensure his form is flawless. He stops dead when he sees the hero grip the string. The giant holds it without a single muscle flinching, and for the first time, the master looks genuinely stunned. With a gaze as sharp as a blade, the hunter locks his focus entirely onto his target. The world around him fades into nothingness. There is only him, the bow, and the mark. He begins to commit every detail to memory. Every strange word, every subtle shift in weight, and every nuance of the movement required to eventually stand among the great hunters. A fire burns in the protagonist's chest. He makes a silent promise to train until his body breaks, determined to become self-sufficient so he never has to rely on anyone else again. His driving ambition is simple: to become a man of such undeniable strength that he can act as an unshakable pillar of support for his wife and little daughter, regardless of what the world throws at them. Far from the training grounds, back in the quiet safety of the cabin, a sweet, melodic voice drifts through the air. Little Dorothy lies in her bed, singing a gentle song about the vast blue sky and her father's handsome, dark hair. The little girl hums to herself, feeling incredibly full and content. She touches her little tummy, feeling as though the delicious meat she ate is still nourishing her, leaving her perfectly satisfied. Nearby, the little girl watches with a soft, content smile. She notices her mother's genuine laughter as she busies herself in the corner of their humble cabin, a sight that has become far more common of late. She thinks back to the days before, realizing that her mother hasn't been this light-hearted or happy since that stranger, the great hunter, first arrived to protect them and bring peace to their home. A warm, comforting glow settles in the child's chest every time she hears the deep, booming sound of her new protector's laugh echoing through the small room. For a moment, her mind wanders to her own hunger, waiting impatiently for her belly to settle, so she can dive back into the remnants of that incredible, savory feast. As she gazes up at the vast, star-dusted sky through the window, she finds herself pondering the true identity of the man who has suddenly become the center of their little world. Dorothy is acutely aware that the man and the beautiful woman are not her blood parents. The realization lingers in the back of her mind, heavy with unspoken questions about where she truly belongs. A sudden, sharp spike of anxiety pierces her heart. She is haunted by a deep-seated, irrational fear of being cast aside, of being abandoned to the cold, just as she was so many times in her past. Doubts swarm her thoughts. Would the big man choose to leave with only the wife, deciding that a useless child was nothing more than an extra mouth to feed? Her vision begins to blur as tears well up in her large, yellow eyes. The mere thought of being forgotten or left behind by this new, fragile family is enough to make her chest ache with sorrow. Without warning, a strange, flickering glow pierces the darkness of the cabin. It snaps the little blonde girl out of her somber spiral, drawing her full, wide-eyed attention. She looks over and realizes the bed beside her is empty. A spike of panic hits her. Where could her mother have possibly gone in the dead of the night? Just then, the cruel, distorted voices of her former father snake through her memory. She can hear him spitting out the same old insults, calling her useless, simply because she wasn't a strong boy. He used to call her a drain on their resources, a burden who wasted good food. Shivering violently, she tries to push the haunting, venomous words away, but the dread clings to her. Pushing past her fear, Dorothy scrambles across the floor. She is driven by a singular, frantic need to get to the meat bucket, determined to protect their food before those bad memories manifest into reality. She reaches the container and exhales a ragged, shaky breath of relief when she sees it's untouched. Still, her heart hammers against her ribs as she continues to scan the darkness for any sign of her protector. Suddenly, a harsh, authoritative shout erupts from just outside the cabin walls. The child freezes, her head snapping toward the sound as a jolt of pure, cold fear courses through her limbs. Paralyzed by shock, the little girl can only manage a tiny, desperate whimper. Her instincts scream that something terribly wrong is unfolding right outside their door. Trembling, she crawls toward the wall and presses her eye against a narrow crack in the wood. Outside, she spots them. 3 men, their faces twisted with malice and greed, prowling through the yard. Her stomach drops. She recognizes them, the same cowards who used to torment her father, the very ones responsible for the misery that defined her early childhood. She tucks herself behind a pile of rocks, huddling out of sight. Her heart is racing, her mind spiraling with the horrific possibility of what these men might do to the mother who has become her entire world. Out in the yard, the 3 debt collectors have boxed the woman in. They are screaming at her, their voices dripping with accusations, claiming she has stolen meat that belongs to them. She is sobbing, desperately trying to explain that her husband hunted the beast himself, but the largest man among them just lets out a cruel, mocking laugh that chills the air. Another thug joins in, bellowing that her husband must be dead. He leers at her, labeling her a common, ungrateful thief who clearly stole what she had no right to own. Through a veil of tears, the young woman frantically denies their claims, but the thugs are past listening. They decide to take matters into their own hands, shoving past her to tear the cabin apart in their search. Without an ounce of pity, the lead aggressor slams the woman to the ground, his voice sharp and commanding as he orders her to be silent. They burst into the dark shack, and their eyes instantly land on the immense wolf pelt hanging in the main room. They stop dead, their faces masks of pure shock. They move closer, their footsteps tentative as they struggle to process the sheer scale of the fur stretched out before them. Greed ignites in the leader's eyes. He reaches out, his hand trembling as he strokes the thick pelt, realizing with predatory glee that they've stumbled upon a fortune. The atmosphere turns electric with avarice. The henchmen let out guttural cheers and immediately begin ransacking every corner of the cabin, tearing through their meager belongings. Little Dorothy remains crouched under the furniture, her breath hitching in her throat as the heavy boots of the invaders thunder closer and closer. Terror finally breaks through her defenses. She realizes these aren't just bullies. These are men with dark, predatory intentions, and she is completely helpless to stop them. Driven by sheer desperation, her mother sprints back inside. She throws herself in front of the wolf pelt, arms spread wide, a desperate barrier against the men trying to claim it. Tears streaming down her face, she finds her voice and shouts at them, warning them with every ounce of her strength that this belongs to them and they have no right to touch it. The pressure in the room is suffocating. Dorothy can't hold it in anymore. A sob breaks free, and she dissolves into desperate, jagged cries. She bolts from her hiding spot, running out into the night and screaming for Joe, pleading for someone, anyone, to come and save them. A ghostly vision manifests in the air, showing a heart-wrenching scene. The henchmen have grabbed the 2 women, dragging them deep into the dark, unforgiving woods. Meanwhile, in a different part of the forest, the protagonist is walking with the veteran. The old man suddenly pauses, pointing toward the distance, his sharp gaze drawing the younger man's attention behind them. Oblivious to the crisis, the young man simply offers a respectful, polite bow, expressing his sincere gratitude for all the guidance and training the master has provided him this day. Then, it cuts through the silence. A piercing cry from far away. The protagonist freezes, his blood running cold as he recognizes the desperate, familiar voice of the little girl. He spins around, his gaze fixed on the direction of his cabin. A suffocating sense of foreboding washes over him, and he knows with absolute certainty that something catastrophic is happening. His heart hammers against his ribs. He is gripped by terror, realizing that his little girl would never scream like that unless they were in immediate, life-threatening danger. With a roar of pure adrenaline, the big man takes off. He sprints through the dense forest, ignoring the branches whipping his face, fueled by a single, burning need to protect his family. He crashes into the clearing and the scene makes his vision blur with rage. 3 thugs are holding his wife, their hands full of his family's stolen possessions. A dark, uncontrollable fury eclipses his composure. As he stares at the criminals threatening his wife and daughter, he makes a silent, lethal vow to see these men pay for their crimes. The red-haired invader spins around, bewildered by the sound of thunderous footsteps closing in on his position from the shadows of the woods. The husband doesn't hesitate. He closes the distance in a heartbeat, unleashing a devastating, bone-shattering punch that lands square on the kidnapper's jaw. The force of the blow sends the coward flying across the yard, sprawling into the dirt. The hero immediately places himself like a bulwark in front of his wife, shielding her from the others. His wife lets out a shuddering, tearful breath of relief. Seeing her protector standing tall before her, she realizes with overwhelming gratitude that he made it back just in time. The big man doesn't say a word. His expression is a mask of lethal, focused intent as he begins to stalk toward the remaining 2 men from the village. The black-haired henchman begins to break into a cold sweat, his legs shaking as he realizes the sheer, terrifying presence of the man standing in front of him. Suddenly, the protagonist lunges. He moves like a blur, driving his knee with brutal, crushing force into the midsection of the terrified invader. The scammer hits the dirt with a guttural scream, his body curling in on itself as he struggles to pull air into his lungs after that bone-shattering strike. Watching his cohorts go down, the final criminal, a man with blonde hair, tries to land a desperate, blind punch against our hero in a last-ditch effort to turn the tide. The hunter barely blinks. With practiced ease, he sidesteps the clumsy blow, snagging the attacker's arm in a vice-like grip as he prepares to dish out some well-deserved retribution. In one fluid, powerful motion, he hauls the henchman off his feet, hoisting him into the air before slamming him violently back down onto the packed earth. The thug lands at an awkward, jarring angle, the full force of the impact vibrating through his already battered and bruised frame. The hero doesn't give him a second to breathe. He pins the man to the ground, his resolve hardening. There is no room for mercy when it comes to those who threaten his new family. He drives a fist into the thug's face, his expression icy. People this cruel, he reasons, don't deserve a second chance. They deserve to be taught a lesson they won't soon forget. His eyes flare with an intense, intimidating energy. He isn't just winning a fight. He's making sure these scoundrels are so terrified that the mere thought of returning to this cabin will make them sick. He grabs the blonde invader by the collar, dragging him up, while the young lady watches from nearby, her hands pressed to her mouth in utter shock at the display of raw dominance. In her panic, she cries out her husband's name. The big guy pauses, his head turning toward her, his fist still crackling with a faint, dangerous aura of residual energy. The coward sees his opening. He lunges at the hero's back, brandishing a razor-sharp tool with the intent to strike while he's distracted. The giant warrior detects the movement instantly. Without even turning, he snatches the criminal's arm mid-air, stopping the blade cold. His fury ignites again, and the henchman begins to tremble, finally realizing just how monstrously strong the man holding him truly is. The young man's expression darkens into something truly predatory. He tightens his grip on the enemy's arm, letting a fraction of his real power show, a warning that he is done playing games. The wife cries out for him to stop. Seeing the situation spiraling, the old master steps forward, his voice firm as he tells his apprentice that the brawl has gone on long enough. The hooded elder places a steady hand on the big man's arm, his presence a stabilizing force as he urges him to let the anger go and calm down immediately. The master gestures toward the cabin, reminding the hunter that his terrifying display is only succeeding in traumatizing the girls. The young lady remains rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs, still reeling from the tension that has engulfed her yard. From the window, little Dorothy watches, her face streaked with tears. She is gripped by the paralyzing fear that these vicious men might ultimately prevail and destroy her newfound family. The hero hears the child sobbing, and as if a switch has been flipped, his aggressive posture collapses. His intimidating aura vanishes instantly, replaced by a deep, hollow concern for the girl he's sworn to protect. The scene fades and shifts back to the humble wooden cabin. A thin plume of smoke curls lazily from the chimney, a silent sign that the storm has passed and the home is finally at peace. The woman stands in the quiet, reflecting on her husband. She has always known him to be gentle, but she is still trying to wrap her head around the fact that this same man can be so utterly, lethally efficient when cornered. Memories of her violent ex-husband surface as she recalls how easily the big man dismantled those cowards, contrasting the two men in her mind. For a fleeting, terrifying second, she had worried that she might end up on the receiving end of that same crushing force. But then she looks into the young man's eyes and sees only softness. The fear evaporates. He never wanted to scare them, and she knows it in her heart. She realizes his tension was purely out of a desperate need to keep them alive. But then the hunter calls out her name, his voice thick with a sudden, mournful tone, as if he thinks she's terrified of him. Rigi is baffled by his reaction. She views herself as an ordinary woman with little worth, and she can't grasp why his own display of strength would make him fear that she'd be afraid of him. She silently begs him not to look so broken. She wants him to know that there is no reason to be sad, that she sees him only as her protector. It would be so simple to tell him she isn't afraid, but the language barrier feels like a mountain between them. Determined, the young woman steels herself, shouting his name with all her might to draw his attention back to her. Surprised, the hero turns. His gaze softens into something incredibly tender as he meets her eyes, and she holds his stare, radiating a fierce, unwavering determination. She reaches out, taking hold of his large hands and squeezing them firmly, pouring every ounce of her affection and sincerity into the physical contact. Feeling the heat radiating from those rough, calloused hands, she knows with absolute certainty that this warrior is the one place in the world where she is truly safe. A relieved smile lights up her face. She understands now that with such a powerful protector at her side, no force on earth will ever threaten their family again. Tears of pure joy spill over. She presses his hands against her cheeks, thanking him from the very depths of her soul for the rescue. The protagonist watches her, his brow still furrowed with a lingering, protective worry. His wife frames his face with her hands, calling Jo-won again, her eyes glistening. She pulls him into an embrace, her body trembling as she thanks him for saving her life. The hunter stands there, bewildered. He can't understand why she is so incredibly grateful for something he considers his basic duty. He pulls her closer, resting his chin on her hair, thinking that in reality, he is the one who owes her a debt of gratitude. The young lady is caught off guard, completely moved by the gentle, unexpected sweetness of his gesture. The view shifts to little Dorothy, who is still cowering in the corner, overwhelmed by the lingering trauma of the attack. His wife calls out Jo-won once more, urgently gesturing toward the little girl who so desperately needs his presence. The young man sprints toward the child, calling her name with panic in his voice. The mother is right behind him, reaching out with a trembling hand, desperate to know if her daughter is okay. The mother stops, her breath catching in her throat when she sees the state of the girl. Dorothy is so consumed by terror that she's had a small accident, her tiny body shaking uncontrollably. The girl's mind is racing. She remembers screaming for help, but the image of the hero's bloodied, massive fists is etched into her mind, terrifying her. She can still see the pain on her mother's and Jo-won's faces. The child is spiraling, worried that she might end up battered like the intruders, convinced that crying will only invite more pain. She's terrified that her behavior has pushed Rigi away. She realizes she needs to say something, or she'll be cast out. Trembling, the little girl stammers out an apology for hiding, her small voice pleading with them not to leave her behind. Dorothy is sobbing, insisting it was all her fault, but her mother pulls her into a warm, desperate embrace, confused by why the girl would blame herself. The woman finally understands. Dorothy had been pretending not to know her, paralyzed by the fear that the intruders would target her too if they knew they were close. The mother tries to reassure her, telling her she's blameless, but the little girl is still reeling. The lady tells her that everything is fine now because Daddy has come to save them, leaving the child completely bewildered. Dorothy blinks back tears, confused. She whispers that Jo-won is just Rigi's husband. She knows that much. The mother clarifies. Because he is her husband, he has also become Dorothy's father. She gently explains that by marrying her, he has taken on the role of her dad, leaving the child standing there in pure amazement. At that moment, the little girl lifts her head, looking at the broad, protective back of their guardian, and wonder begins to take root in her heart. Could he really be her daddy? The little girl tilts her head from side to side, her eyes wide with innocent confusion as she seeks confirmation, and her mother nods, gently affirming everything she has just said. The woman tenderly strokes Dorothy's hair, her voice soft and reassuring as she explains that this new dad is unlike anyone they have known before. He is a guardian who will ensure they are safe from any harm. A spark of realization dawns on Dorothy. She understands now that the big man had fought off those menacing intruders precisely because she had reached out to him for help. Mother and daughter move to the cabin window, standing side by side as they peer out into the yard. Their gazes fixed intently on the hunter as he stands amidst the aftermath of the struggle. Dorothy draws a deep, steadying breath, her small chest rising, and then she shouts with every ounce of power in her tiny lungs, calling out, "Daddy!" As she watches him, she thinks about his massive frame, the way he stands like a mountain, with hands and feet so large they could effortlessly shield her from anything the world might throw their way. The little girl scrambles outside, her heart racing with newfound security, emboldened by the knowledge that she has a father who is unimaginably strong and will never let her be hurt again. Memories wash over her. The kindness in his eyes when he gave her a name, and the way he didn't hesitate to share his own plate of food, showing her a care she had never felt before. She beams, a radiant smile spreading across her face, fueled by the sheer happiness of knowing that the man who gave her an identity is now officially her father. Hearing the desperate, joyful shout, the big man pivots, his heavy boots kicking up dust as he turns to see what has caused the sudden commotion. His eyes widen slightly, his sharp gaze catching the sight of little Dorothy hurtling toward him, a bright, genuine smile lighting up her features. The young man's face softens, all traces of his previous combat-hardened expression vanishing as he opens his arms wide, welcoming the little girl into his embrace. He catches her, pulling her close in a crushing, protective hug, and Dorothy lets out a melodic laugh of pure, unadulterated joy, finally feeling the warmth of her new father's arms. The hero holds her close, a thoughtful expression on his face. He doesn't quite grasp the language she speaks, yet he intuitively understands the depth and sincerity of her meaning. He keeps little Dorothy cradled against his chest, and she looks up at him, radiant and feeling completely secure. He notices a mischievous, funny little smile playing on her lips and wonders what could possibly be tickling her fancy. As he looks down at her, the hunter realizes that the poor girl had another small accident, her nerves finally snapping under the intense pressure of the earlier fear. He finds her smile so incredibly innocent and pure that his heart aches. He actually feels a pang of guilt for even noticing the mess, wishing he could have spared her the distress. He decides immediately that she needs fresh clothes, and just as he moves, his wife comes hurrying toward them, worry and relief etched onto her face. The three of them draw together, sharing a collective, heartfelt embrace. A touching moment that solidifies their bond as a family in the wake of the day's trials. Suddenly, a look of realization crosses the little girl's face. She remembers something vital and blurts out a question, wondering what became of the meat they had gathered earlier. The couple looks at her in surprise, and before they can even react, the girl bolts away, shouting urgently as she hunts for their precious stash of food. She dashes toward the spot where the intruders lie unconscious, and her new dad calls out her name, his voice laced with concern for her safety. The little girl flies right past the bodies of the fallen men, her focus entirely on her mission. She doesn't spare a single glance for the attackers who had caused them so much misery. Her true prize is the wooden bucket, sitting abandoned in the dirt, filled with the precious, hard-earned pieces of meat. She reaches the bucket and attempts to hoist it, gritting her teeth and putting every ounce of her small strength into the effort to lift the heavy container. The bucket is far too cumbersome for her. It tilts precariously, the weight dragging her down as it begins to slip toward the ground. She stumbles and falls, but in a display of desperate determination, she catches the bucket against her head, refusing to let even a scrap of their food spill onto the earth. Her parents charge over in a panic, their footsteps thudding against the ground as they shout her name, terrified she might be hurt. Dorothy's face is scrunched in a mask of extreme, unwavering effort, her only goal to keep the precious meat from tumbling out of its container. Somehow, against all odds, the little one manages to heave the bucket up, and the hunter stands frozen in amazement at the sheer tenacity hidden within his daughter. He watches her, thinking that her obsession with that meat is intense, while his wife watches the scene with a soft, amused smile. Seeing that she won't give up, the big man intervenes. He chuckles quietly, scoops her up, and gently places the little girl inside the wooden bucket itself. He lifts the bucket with Dorothy safely tucked inside, and she gazes up at him with a triumphant, joyful shout, clearly thrilled by the adventure. The hero looks at her and realizes that for a child, the path to seeing someone as a hero is simple. Sometimes all it takes is a helping hand and a bucket full of meat. His wife approaches, her gaze shifting to the open door, as she asks him to bring their food inside where it will be safe. She then gestures for him to bring Dorothy inside as well, noting that the yard is still far too dangerous for them to linger. The little girl scrambles into the cabin, shouting excitedly about the meat, and the big man follows closely behind, careful to keep them both protected. Back in the sanctuary of their home, the hunter exhales a long, shaky sigh of relief, his shoulders finally dropping as he realizes the danger has passed and they are all safe. But as his eyes wander back toward the unconscious men left in the dirt outside, his expression undergoes a chilling, sharp transformation. His eyes flare with a dark, predatory anger, his face hardening into a look of cold, intense resolve. Just as he tenses, the old master appears from the shadows, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. His presence a silent command for the young man to quell his inner fire. The elder warns him against further conflict, but the young man pauses, questioning the wisdom of letting those threats remain loose. He contemplates the misery of captivity, knowing he cannot afford to be dragged away again. He silently commits the faces of the attackers to memory, a silent oath burning in his mind. He glances over at his wife, the realization hitting him that he is no longer walking this path alone. With a fierce glint in his eyes, he promises himself that he will remember their faces and eventually ensure they pay for what they did. The old master points toward the gear the thieves discarded in the dirt, suggesting that he collect these items, as they are essential tools for surviving the harshness of the mountains. The young man looks toward the cabin, seeing the silhouettes of his wife and daughter waiting for him, safe and sound. He steps through the doorway with a newfound confidence, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips as he carries their supplies and the wolf pelt inside. Once inside, the hero kneels down, meticulously organizing the new gear he has acquired, his movements precise and purposeful. He thinks back to the life he once had, acknowledging that losing his family in the past was a nightmare he refuses to ever repeat. With a determined, steady smile lighting his face, the young man seems to have found a new, ironclad purpose for his life. With a heavy heart and a resolve harder than steel, he turns his gaze toward his wife and young daughter. Watching them in that quiet moment, he makes a silent, unbreakable vow to himself. Come what may, and regardless of the perils that lie ahead, he will do whatever it takes to ensure their absolute safety.